can't you see way up in the sky? Making circles in the morning sun, flying high in the sky till the day is done. I can't break away. Like a child in his fantasy, punching holes in the walls of reality. All my life I wanted to fly, but I don't have the wings, and I wonder why. I can't break away. Oh, well, Mama told me when I was young, stand tall, girl, you're number one. But you can be what you wanna be, but you can't change the course of your destiny. I can't break away. Well, no, I can't break away. I can't break away. Well, no, I can't break away. Ooh, I can't break away.
Greetings, my excellent friend.
Good evening. Welcome in. Episode 1.42 of Fixer's Heavy Metal History. Counting today, there is 42, 43, 44, 45 episodes. 4 more. Counting tonight before Season 1 ends. Sparky, thank you very much for the 20-month resub at Tier 1 Berlin. Good to see you, my friend. Yes, you were first. And for those of you that weren't here live, you missed a pretty cool little tidbit, a 1-minute thing that CF did for me on the fly yesterday. He did Walk Like an Egyptian, like off the cuff for me, which I added into the intro music tonight. But we are going to, for the first time in a long time in this show, stay focused on basically one thing tonight. I have spent the last couple of episodes trying to rearrange how I was approaching France proper on the European continent, so that I could spend the entire episode here. Mads, I can send it to you, Berlin.
What's with kicking the balls? Is that enough payment?
Good evening, Mads. But what we're going to do tonight is pick up where we left off last episode. If you were here and you recall, you know that Lord Horatio Nelson was chasing Napoleon's large, massive fleet across the Mediterranean on his way to Alexandria. And so, as promised, this week, we're going to spend the entire episode covering Napoleon Bonaparte's expedition to Egypt. We're going to stay with him for an entire year and then a little bit longer, even after he leaves, to kind of put a little bit of an end cap on what exactly happens to the French guys in Egypt. We're going to follow Napoleon, though, all the way through August 1799, when he decides, for the good of France, that he has to abandon his army in Egypt.
My lord, go f*** yourself!
Thanks, Berlin. That Napoleon's going to decide, for the good of France, that he has to abandon his army in Egypt and sail home, back to France, to take control of what is a disintegrating situation back in Europe, which that'll be next episode. What is that disintegrating situation in Europe? Some of it is happening in parallel to Napoleon's time in Egypt, but the reason that I'm framing it the way I'm framing it from an episodic format is because Napoleon doesn't know until a certain point that things are deteriorating back in Europe. So this is kind of a feel from Napoleon's perspective of, we're just going to take him through Egypt to the point that he finds out that crap has hit the fan back in Europe. And we'll explain why Napoleon didn't find out until well into the Egyptian campaign about what was going on back in Europe. What I really mean here is that we'll be sticking with Napoleon Bonaparte through August 1799 until he finally is allowed to have news, because he will be effectively blockaded. He won't have any ability to get messages for a reason while he is in Egypt. So, first off, I don't ever do this live, and I need to. Thank you to the Tier 2 and Tier 3 subs. These maps that are on the screen tonight are from the map archive. They are professionally done. They cover the 3 specific points I wanted to cover tonight. They ran a couple bucks, and so the tier 2, tier 3 folks helped me offset that cost, and I really appreciate it. So as we left Napoleon last episode, he was sailing with this massive fleet, and I said it was hundreds of ships, and that deserves some clarification. It was hundreds of ships, but they weren't all warships. Some of them were tender ships and supply ships and carrying all manner of things. There were a lot of warships, but it wasn't 100 warships. But they were sailing from Malta to Alexandria, having managed to somehow slip past Lord Admiral Horatio Nelson's squadron, that little 6-ship squadron that was ping-ponging back and forth to Toulon. They somehow slipped by and got on their way to Alexandria before Nelson saw them, came really close once. But at the end of the episode, remember, Nelson did know, or he was pretty sure, that Napoleon was heading to Alexandria, so he's now chasing him there. Also remember that the French soldiers now knew where they were going. They knew when they left Malta, Napoleon felt it was safe to share with them at that point that they were heading to Egypt. And you have to imagine that those soldiers were probably licking their chops a little bit. That here's Napoleon, the best general in France. And that's fact. I mean, he was the most successful general in France at the time, leading them 40,000 strong, supported by this very large fleet, to a land of ancient wealth. Ancient wealth. It's really hard to encapsulate how ancient Egypt is. We talk about Alexander the Great, and Alexander the Great was, several hundred years BC, and he sets up the second the Ptolemaic dynasty, which was actually a Hellenistic dynasty in Egypt. And you're still talking 1,000 years before that. BC is when you're into the core dynasty phase in Egypt. It is an ancient land of wealth. So these guys are going on their way with Napoleon to Alexandria to effectively, in their mind, raid the place. And unfortunately for them, the air of enthusiasm that they had would eventually turn into nothing but a mound of regret for all of the troops. And it's really important to keep in mind the perspective of the troops and what they're going to go through as we go through this episode tonight. So, as Napoleon approached Alexandria, and Alexandria on your map is effectively the second black dot in from the left. I'm putting my cursor on it right now. It's this dot. That's where the fleet is coming in at. And I'm also going to mention a place called Abukir Bay very shortly. Abukir Bay is this little bay right here that has, let me see if I can draw you a little bit of a line here. It's this area right here. This is Abukir Bay. This is where the famous Battle of the Nile is going to take place. We're going to have a better look at it when we get to that point, but I want you to understand where Abukir Bay is in relation to Alexandria as we get started. Other cities that are going to be important tonight are Cairo, which is down here, Jaffa, which is up here, and Acre, which is here. So as we go through the episode tonight, the path of Napoleon is effectively this light blue line. He's going to split himself into 2 divisions at one point, but he's going to take a path down to Cairo along the Nile, and then come up along the coastline to Jaffa, and then come up along the coastline to Acre. It's a lot. That's why I'm trying to kind of show you where it is now, so that you can follow along with the map when I'm mentioning places. So when Napoleon was getting ready to land in Alexandria, he wanted to make sure that these 40,000 men were going to approach this campaign in Egypt not only with the utmost military skill that he basically expected of everyone under his command, but also with political skill. Napoleon was not going to Egypt for a smash and grab job. It wasn't even presented to the directory that way. He wanted to establish a permanent French occupation in Egypt. And so, as they were sailing for Alexandria, the troops on the ships got orders that there was to be absolutely no looting of any kind, no pillaging that might antagonize the natives. You have to remember as well that this is a Christian nation going into an area, a country that is predominantly Muslim. So every man on the expedition was to go out of his way to show deference and respect to Islam. And Napoleon will get tagged with this idea that no matter where he is, he adopts the customs of the locals, and quite frankly, that's smart. Now, whether it was genuine whether it was genuine, and there is some question around Napoleon historically, like did he convert to Islam? I believe the answer to that is no, but he really wanted everybody to believe the answer was yes, especially while he was in Egypt and while he was dealing with the Ottoman Empire. So a major part of Napoleon's strategy, based on what I just said, was to ingratiate himself with the local imams, the Muslim religious leaders. He wanted to almost come across as a liberator. Excuse me. Someone who was coming that understood who they were and wanted to free them. What's up, Herc? So because of this, he could not have undisciplined soldiers just out there running wild in Alexandria and Cairo, just desecrating mosques and stealing things, or, you know, spitting on the high priests of Islam in the area. It would backfire on him. But the other major part, and I kind of just said it, of Napoleon's political strategy was to paint this French invasion army as an army of liberators. So just how were a bunch of French invaders going to sell themselves as liberators all the way over in Egypt? What on earth did the Egyptians need liberated from? Well, the answer is really one word. They're called the Mamluks. And that's M-A-M-L-U-K-S, Mamluks. Well, what is a Mamluk? What is that? Well, the word simply means slave, oddly enough. And that's what they were, slaves. But they were a really special kind of slave. They were warrior slaves. And the parallel here is, the thing people will understand is in Game of Thrones, there are children raised to be fighters from birth. Now, these guys weren't castrated like in Game of Thrones, but they were purchased as children, raised into an elite warrior caste of slaves. And then the Mamluks acted as standing armies or permanent bodyguards for rulers all across the Muslim world. And some of them got to be so high in standing that they effectively gained their independence to a degree. In some cases, their power and prestige just got so big, and these warrior slaves were able to push aside the nominal rules and wield power directly, as is the case in Egypt in the late 18th century, and that is who Napoleon is claiming he's coming to liberate the Egyptians from, because the Mamelukes were not Egyptians. They were foreigners. Yes, the Unsullied, that's who I'm talking about. Mamelukes, yes. You got it spelled right, Mads. So the Mamelukes had seized Egypt way back in 1250 AD. And they established what was called the Mamluk Sultanate, which ruled Egypt from 1250 AD until 1570 AD. And at that point, they were conquered by the Ottoman Turks. And the independent Mamluk Sultanate was dissolved. But once inside this greater Ottoman Empire, who now had control over Egypt, the Mamelukes still carved out for themselves a pretty great deal of autonomy. And they weren't slaved. The leaders in Egypt weren't slaved to Ottoman masters. They had kind of still had done enough that they were perpetuating themselves as just the de facto rulers of Egypt. By the time Napoleon arrives in Egypt, it is for all intents and purposes a self-governing unit led by two Mamluk leaders who shared power with each other. One was named Murad Bey. He is the bottom left of the grid of people this evening, who basically was the Egyptian military commander-in-chief. And then his partner was Ibrahim Bey, who handled civilian administration of Cairo, Alexandria, and pretty much all of Egypt. But it's important to note here that the term Bey, B-E-Y, is not a last name. These guys are not related. It's a Turkic title for chieftain. It's an honorific that's traditionally applied to people with special lineages, to the leaders of or rulers of various Turkic kingdoms, emirates, sultanates, and empires in Central Asia, Southeast Asia, and the Middle East. So when we say Murad Bey or Ibrahim Bey, we are saying their first name is Murad or Ibrahim, and Bey is effectively their title, governor, leader. It's a distinctive honorific that you earn. So the thing to keep in mind here is that the Mamluks are, again, foreigners. They're foreigners to the Egyptians. They were captured as children by Ottoman slave traders from areas like the Caucasus Mountains in the Balkans, and then sold to be trained to be Mamelukes, much in the same kind of way that you would think of, again, the Unsullied is a good example that everyone knows, the Unsullied in Game of Thrones. So when the French landed in July 1798, Napoleon circulated a proclamation to the native Egyptians that said the French were here to rid them of the tyrannical Mamelukes, and then that is exactly what Napoleon set out to do. So again, the French landed near Alexandria on July 1st, 1798. And as the fleet kind of staged itself off the coast, Napoleon was informed that Alexandria was preparing to resist the landing. So of his 40,000 man strong force, he took 5,000 men and rushed them ashore that very night. Right up under the walls of the city. Just got there before the Mameluke military leader, Murad Bey, could get anything going to defend this city. He just got his men underneath basically missile fire that would have come the next day. Got them right up against the walls. So that when the Alexandrians woke up the next morning, like the people in general, they found the French at the gates of their city and the defensive arrangements weren't complete yet. The soldiers in Alexandria took one look at what was going on and what had happened, and they ran out the back gate. They basically abandoned Alexandria because of this one move by Napoleon. And the city was just open to him at that point. He walked in and he took it. And this was pretty important because this was the first port city taken by Napoleon during the Egyptian campaign. It's much harder to operate when you have to do an amphibious landing like this if you don't have a port to operate out of. We're going to talk about that a lot when we get to World War II and the Normandy landings, what are called mulberry harbors and these fake docks that basically were these artificial causeways that were created by the Allies. Well, aren't you looking lovely tonight, my friend? Duke Whiskey. Good evening, sir. How are you doing? I am trying to look lovely with my new glasses and try not to wear a hat, but if you're not following this guy, Duke Whiskey, he streams in the afternoon, and he is pretty funny. He plays a huge variety of games. He's got a super cheerful channel. If you haven't followed him and you're looking for someone to watch after Perm, that's your guy. Give that guy a follow. So, the port's important because Napoleon needed the ability. He didn't want to keep his men on ship. He needed to get his men offloaded. So taking Alexandria quickly was a critical first step to success for Napoleon. And with the port now captured, I was on alert. Imagine they were very excited to fight against Napoleon and give him a black eye, except that no one had really won one fight so far in Napoleon's military history that we've talked about has he lost. And he even went back to the leadership in the directory and told them that he really didn't lose that fight when he did. But with the port captured, Napoleon then landed the rest of his 40,000 men to get them off the ship. Because keeping men cooped up on ship for too long, you're asking for fights, you're asking for trouble, and you're asking for disease to spread. He just got them off without incident. Alexandria captured. Away we go on the Egyptian campaign. But for Napoleon, the real target in this initial phase of his operations was the Mamluk capital in Cairo, which was located about 130 miles up, which in this case means down in terms of the map, the Nile River into the Egyptian interior. And why is it? You'll hear the term Upper Nile and Lower Nile. And when us and our Western brains that live in the Northern Hemisphere, we think upper means top. It doesn't in this case because the Nile River empties north into the Mediterranean. So the Lower Nile is closer to the Mediterranean, up. And the Upper Nile is deeper into the interior, down on the map. So he wants to get to Cairo, 130 miles up the Nile River. So without really pausing at all in Alexandria, Napoleon takes his army and breaks it up into two pieces. There are basically two large divisions that Napoleon sends marching to Cairo in two distinct directions. And I'm going to draw them on the map for you before I explain to you. I already kind of drew one. The main force that Napoleon's going to lead is actually going to come down this side of the Nile and head toward Old Cairo, which is just to the other side of New Cairo. Then the other force is going to come through the desert, which sucked for them, and meet up. That's effectively where these two divisions are going. Now, the troops that are coming through the desert, they're going to get harassed by Bedouins, and it's just going to be a bad time for them. Because you have to also imagine the area around the Nile River Delta, like this area here, really green. This is where agriculture happened in Egypt. This over here, over to the west, thank you very much, Red Rig Engine, that is not very green. That is very, very sandy. Very hard terrain. I don't know if you've ever marched in boots in sand. It's not fun. So that's the approach Napoleon's going to take here. We used to run in boots in sand because that's how we kept the calves in shape. But yeah, you don't want to do it if you don't have to. Yeah, with high winds as well. You're not wrong, Hark. So the division led by Bonaparte hugged the coastline and then followed the Nile due south along, actually I had it wrong, along the west bank of the river, so the left side of the river. The other division plunged southeast out of Alexandria, headed straight across the desert, southwest out of Alexandria, headed straight across the desert. And that, again, was not the division you wanted to be in if you were a French soldier. It was the hottest and driest part of the year in Egypt. But, again, that French column was just harassed constantly by Bedouin raiders. And if you've never been involved in desert warfare, nomads are a thing. And you do not want to get separated from your unit. Because if you are a straggler with desert nomads who are well acclimated to fighting out there as a hit and fade guerrilla tactic type unit, you'll just get picked off. So the French soldier who kind of fell behind, he didn't get left behind. He just went poof. The Bedouins would just pick that guy off. The division coming up the Nile, the one that Napoleon was leading himself, was accompanied by a small flotilla of gunboats. There'd be some of those ships that came in from the fleet, right? Some of those ships that were part of that 100-ship fleet. But gunboats in the Nile means that they were smaller, that they had a shallower keel because it wouldn't scrape across the riverbed. Because the rest of the fleet just couldn't sail up the Nile. We couldn't take 100 ships, especially these, man-of-war ship of the lines that had deep keels. You couldn't take them up the Nile. So while Napoleon marched into the interior, he told basically his French counterpart in the Navy, French Admiral Francois Paul Bruy de Gallier, who is, where do I have him? He is right next to Napoleon on the top row, so one to the right of Napoleon. He told de Gallier, and that's what I'm going to call him for the sake of not saying four names all night. Napoleon told the French admiral to anchor at Aboukir Bay. Now again, Aboukir Bay, and this is a big, important area. Aboukir Bay is right here. This bay, which has that shoal to its left side, this bay right here is where Napoleon tells his admiral, go put the ships there. Because it was relatively defensible if no one really knew you were there. The problem is Horatio Nelson has guessed where Napoleon is going correctly. But Napoleon tells de Gallier, go anchor in Aboukir Bay. It's about 20 miles to the northeast of Alexandria. And just stay there. Just stay put. But de Gallier was told to only stay put if the fleet was absolutely free of any potential danger. Like, you're basically just parking there because it's a good place to park. But if you feel like the neighborhood turns bad, get out of there before the guys who want to jack your cars get there. If there was even a hint of trouble, Napoleon ordered de Gallier to sail all the way to Corfu, which is an island off Saxton, who I was helping a little bit with some Sea of Thieves. Saxon just did maiden voyage in Sea of Thieves and was getting some orientation of the game going. Welcome in and thank you for the raid. I'm Lord High Fixer. I do a history stream every Saturday night called Fixer's Heavy Metal History. We are in episode 42 of our journey through the French Revolution, and tonight we find ourselves with Napoleon Bonaparte in his Egyptian expedition. But again, de Gallier was told only stay in Aboukir Bay if it was safe. But if he wasn't, if you felt like anything, if you felt any danger whatsoever, to sail to Corfu. And Corfu was an island off the Greek coast on the west side of Greek in the Ionian Sea. So imagine basically you're sailing back up toward like Yugoslavia in the modern sense of, if you know where that is, but Bosnia, Herzegovina. That's basically where Napoleon is telling de Gallier to go if he sees any trouble. Take the ships and get out of here. Because Napoleon was very sure that the army would be able to take care of itself on land for a while. But he knew it was extremely imperative. It was critical that the French fleet remain intact. Because without the French fleet, he wouldn't have no intelligence coming from Europe. He would have no ability to get resupplied from Europe. And he would have no ability to be reinforced from Europe. The worst possible thing that could happen to Napoleon in Egypt and for the entire expedition would be for the fleet to be destroyed by the British. And that is exactly what is going to happen. Now, you're quite welcome, Saxon. It's good to see you. So the Mameluke commander, Murad Bey, made his first stand against the French coming up the Nile outside the town of Shubraqit on July 13th. And this is where I get to draw on the map a little bit. Shubraqit, and I'm going to guesstimate this, don't hold me to it, but I looked it up before. Shubraqit is around like this area. It's around here somewhere. Actually, I think it's kind of around here somewhere on the map. It's not on this map, and it's really small on modern maps, but Shubraqit is the name of the town because that's what the battle is named after. So, the thing about this is, the Mamelukes were outnumbered. This division the Nile division, not the Desert division, the Nile division was about 23,000 men strong, and Murad Bey had only been able to muster about 14,000. But the Mamelukes had a massive cavalry advantage, and desert warfare is often about a cavalry advantage. And not only that, heavy cavalry was the particular specialty of the Mamelukes. It's what they did best. It's why they ruled Egypt. They had heavy cavalry that you could equate to the Cataphact. These just massive armored individuals, armored horses, just heavy cavalry. You don't want to be in front of these guys if they're charging you. But it was a new world. And heavy cavalry generally ruled the day in an infantry battle. But Napoleon was going to create this new world and new tactical idea of how to deal with cavalry right on the spot. And what Napoleon did was he built what were called divisional squares. Even though they were rectangles, they weren't exactly perfect squares. He created a concept called divisional squares. They're imprecisely called that. They're rectangular formations. They're about 6 men deep, hollow in the middle, which is where the baggage and the supplies would come from. So you have to imagine that as Napoleon's forming up, he's forming his men into these rectangles. And all the baggage, the middle of this is hollow. So he's like 6 men deep across the entire square. Man, I can't draw it all tonight. He's about 6 men deep inside that square, and in the middle is his baggage. Also in the middle is where most of the senior officers, they just kind of got back from the middle. But at each corner of a divisional square is where Napoleon parked his artillery. So you have this concept where these corners are just packed with heavy guns. The Mamelukes would charge at this with their heavy cavalry. And as they charged and as they rounded this formation trying to break it, these guns would just fire at them. And the infantry would fire at them. And as they got too close to this, because it was right angle on right angle on right angle on right angle, they couldn't break it. They could not break this formation. It was pretty impregnable to cavalry attack. And in terms of Napoleon's contributions to modern military tactics, the divisional square is right up there with the attack from the rear tactic that he deployed in Italy, as well as the strategy of the central position, which he deployed in Italy. And he'll deploy both of those and the divisional square repetitively during the Empire period. But there's also an irony here, because by the end of the Napoleonic War, this is just one of the things that European commanders are going to look at and go, why is Napoleon successful? Well, divisional squares seem to work really well against cavalry. Well, the Duke of Wellington is going to deploy them against Napoleon at a little place called Waterloo. Napoleon by Waterloo will have one of the most famous cavalries in the world. They're called the cuirassiers. They armored breastplate mounted cavalry that carried, rifle, and they were amazing until Napoleon ran into the guy that used his own tactic against him. At Waterloo, the Duke of Wellington will deploy divisional squares in the same way that Napoleon is deploying them against Murad Bey right now to nullify the cavalry advantage, and it will work. And it's one of the big reasons Napoleon loses at the Battle of Waterloo in the 100 Days. But for now, once Murad Bey realized that all of his cavalry charges were getting his men killed and doing absolutely no damage to the French, he decided to retreat further up, meaning down the Nile, up to the headwaters, down south on the Nile. So, after Shubraqit, the French army coming up the Nile, down toward Cairo, linked with the division coming out of the desert. And they all came back together, so massing his forces, like you should before you do a final assault. Hey, Austrians, the 4 times you tried to go, at anything in northern Italy. Napoleon gets his forces together before they go against Cairo. Now, Old Cairo is located right here. And I'm going to zoom in now. Old Cairo is located on this side of... New Cairo, is located on this side of the river. But over here on this side is where Old Cairo was. And Napoleon's forces effectively came down the river, came through the desert, and then linked up before they finally pushed on Cairo. I'll get rid of all this drawing for you because we're eventually going to put this map to the back. Because I actually have a much better map to show you once we start talking about what is coming next. So let me bring that back out so you guys can see everything again. And then move the map around a little bit. One more click out. Okay. Cairo was located on the western side, on the eastern side of the river. So Murad Bey massed 25,000 men on the west side of the river, the same side Napoleon's on, to try to prevent the French from crossing the Nile to get to the city proper. Inside Cairo, Ibrahim Bey, that's the guy who's like the governor administrator of Egypt, was waiting with reinforcements, but he could not get those forces out to cross the river in time to join the fight between Murad Bey and Napoleon. On July 21st, the two forces met in what is known as the Battle of the Pyramids. Hey, map, do you want to... There we go, that's the Battle of the Nile. That's not the one I want. This is the one I want. The Battle of the Pyramids. So we're going to zoom in on this because it doesn't really take place at Cairo. It doesn't really take place at the pyramids either, but it gets named that because Napoleon liked that name, basically. On July 21st, the two forces met outside of Cairo. It's really at the fortress city of Imbaba. But about 9 miles off in the distance from where these guys are fighting at the Battle of the Pyramids were the pyramids. They were visible in the background. The Great Pyramids of Giza were visible in the background. It's why you see these famous paintings of Napoleon like riding with the pyramids in the background of what's going on in the fight, because he knew the propaganda value of that visual. So after the battle was won by Napoleon here, he decided that the Battle of the Pyramids sounded a whole lot better than the Battle of Imbaba, which is why we call it the Battle of the Pyramids. But the Battle of the Pyramids was effectively Shubraqit on a larger scale. The French formed themselves into 5 massive divisional squares, repelled every single cavalry charge that the Beys sent against them, and the Mamluk army lost a literal uncountable number of men. Like, they don't know how many men they lost. It was so high. Napoleon would write home in the wake of the Battle of the Pyramids that the Mamluks lost 20,000 men. It's a ton. It's a simple, massive number. When you compare it to this, 20,000 men lost for the Egyptian forces under the Beys, these mostly heavy cavalry, these Catrefect-type heavy cavalry units. The French report was 29 dead, 260 wounded, compared to 20,000. And that's an estimate on the the hands of the French, because they really didn't know how many men they had killed. It was a lot compared to 29 dead and 260 wounded. And that illustrates how extremely effective the idea of this divisional square was against cavalry. And when the tactic became widely known, because Napoleon is who he is, he's kind of a braggart, the rest of the generals in Europe will go, and it'll double take them. Because it'll be like, oh, what? Everyone knew that the Turkic, Ottoman, Egyptian cavalry was no joke. And to have this simple tactic, it is relatively simple, just reduce them to inconsequential in a fight, will cause the European generals to go, oh, well, we should probably do that. And it will cause them to look at everything Napoleon does, because they will recognize that he is innovating, that he's not just some guy who went to war college, got a commission, came out and is following the book. He is innovating to his situation, and he's winning due to it. And a lot of things that we're going to talk about as we get into season 2 are going to be about how warfare changes because Europe begins to model themselves on Napoleon. So with 20,000 men dead at the Battle of the Pyramids, Murad Bey flees with the remnants of his army deep into the Upper Nile, so further south. Meanwhile, his partner, Ibrahim Bey, abandons Cairo and flees to the northeast. So they go in two different directions. Bonaparte himself set off in pursuit of Ibrahim Bey, so went northeast after Ibrahim Bey. Caught up with him. And after a quick battle, he sent the remaining Mamluks under Ibrahim Bey's command running clear out of Egypt and up into Syria, way further to the northeast. So the Battle of the Pyramids, again, was, you can see that we have these boxes here that are effectively the unit deployments of Bonaparte. But you have to understand that within this, as these cavalry attacks come, it's more like this. There's 5 of these divisional squares that are just positioned to allow the Mamluk cavalry to actually go in between them and try to encircle them, because that is what cavalry tactics were for an entrenched infantry position. And while they're doing that, the corners of these formations are just blasting artillery as they clear each other's line into the cavalry and just blowing them up. At the same time, as they approach the front and exposed flank sides, the infantry is just small arms fire shooting at the cavalry. Now, these guys are obviously spaced so that the amount of distance between each square was far enough so that the squares could not fire on each other and cause damage. The effective range of a non-rifled musket in that time was really less than 150 yards. So as long as you were 150 yards away from the next square next to you, you were going to fire and really no chance you're going to hurt the guy next to you. But as the cavalry passed right next to you and you had a mass of infantry just at the same time, you could lay down horses as they came past you. It was astonishingly just effective in terms of what happened. And the whole reason I have this Battle of the Pyramids map up here is because I wanted to show you how the tactic kind of worked. Because showing it to you just as a box is one thing, but to see that effectively these squares could advance together as well. These squares could move in unison if well disciplined and just move south together, pushing the cavalry back while the cavalry still tried to run around them and around them and around them and just getting annihilated. And cannot stress enough how impactful the divisional square was to not only desert warfare, but just modern warfare in European terms as well. It would change everything with how cavalry was used for 50 years and beyond. The funny thing, though, is as we approach World War I, Napoleon's cavalry that was blown away at Waterloo, the cuirassiers, will still be the cuirassiers. The French government will still be employing armor, breastplate, almost knights with guns at the breakout of World War I. So while they're the innovators here at the end of the 19th century, they will stagnate themselves at the end of the at the end of the 19th century. So Napoleon pursues Bey northeast out of Cairo. Murad Bey goes south. So we're going to bring this map back to the front for a little while. Or we're just going to move around and have... There we go. So there we go. Napoleon just follows Bey northeast out of Cairo, which you can see is, again, indicated by this line. And, again, follow the blue lines on this map for the rest of the night, and you have a really good idea of where Napoleon is. The dark blue lines are going to be after, basically, Napoleon leaves. So, anyway, let's get back to what we're talking about here. Let's get rid of that line. I'll go back over here, and I will zoom this back out so that you can see everybody again. There we go. All right. So Napoleon chases Ibrahim Bey northeast out of Cairo. Catches him. The remaining Mamluks basically just run northeast out of Egypt into Syria. Syria obviously on the right-hand side of your map. This battle and the subsequent mop-up at the Battle of the Pyramids effectively ended 500 years of Mamluk rule in Egypt. Realistically, it ended close to 900 years of Mamluk rule. But under the Ottomans, it ended a period of long, comfortable, and understood rule by the Mamluks as well, which is going to be problematic for Napoleon as he tries to get his political program going in Egypt. But before we go to the break, we're going to talk about, because it really doesn't take that long to talk about, we're going to talk about what is known as the Battle of the Nile, because here you have Bonaparte. Things were looking great for him, right? He's gone in and captured Alexandria relatively without firing a shot, successfully chased the Beys all the way down to Cairo, taken it easily, forced them out of Egypt and into Syria, looking great. But little does he know, about a week and a half after he takes Cairo, all of his fancy plans are just going to get blown out of the water, literally. So as instructed, French Admiral Dujalier had taken his 13 ships of the line, each with 74 guns, and 4 frigates that had 36 to 40 guns apiece, and he parked them in Abukir Bay. So here's that shoal. If you look at this map, you can see that curved shoal again. And the reason I've highlighted it is because it's important. This curved shoal right here that forms the western edge of Abukir Bay. You can see that shoal effectively right here on this map. That is this shoal. That is this tip that's coming down this direction in Abukir Bay. So Dujalier had parked his ships like he was supposed to, like he had been ordered to, in Abukir Bay. Now, of the 100 ships that came, there weren't that many that were actual warships, like true deep keel warships. 13 ships of the line, and again, 4 frigates, so 17 ships. But Dujalier disagreed with Napoleon's assessment that the army could live without the navy. And that's typical Navy thinking. There's no way you'll live without me. Me and my ships are important all the time. And that's true. But it would have been so much better if he had just left like he was supposed to leave whenever he found himself in trouble. But he didn't think Napoleon could live without the Navy, and quite frankly disobeyed a direct order. Napoleon was overall in charge here. It wasn't like they were co-leaders. So when he surveyed the scene, when Dujalier surveyed the scene in the bay, he determined he could just anchor. He could anchor his fleet right here in a way that made it, he believed, that would make it so that he could repel any British attack. If the British came, I will deploy my fleet in such a way in this bay that they can't possibly defeat me. Ho, ho, ho. Typical arrogant commander thinking. My theoretical plan here is so good that there's no possible way I can be defeated. Well, that's a great way to get defeated. The critical was that he thought his line, which was arrayed northwest to southeast, as is indicated. It's not really arrayed at a steep angle. It's still arrayed. Yeah, his failure informs our Sea of Thieves gameplay. Indeed. But he's arrayed northwest to southeast. And he was anchored, at least he believed, to the northwestern shoals here so tightly that he didn't think the British could approach him in any way from the west. Now, you can tell from the map that they absolutely get on his western side. But he thought that the only way that the British ships could fight would be to effectively come in, run the line, circle, and run the line. And he thought if he was at anchor, that he had a really good chance of just blowing them away. Because they weren't going to be able to come in and go to anchor. They'd have collided with each other. It would have taken them too long to form up that way. So being at anchor here, actually, in de Jalier's mind, was a good thing. I don't think it was. Place the thieves, like I just told Saxon, you don't ever leave your ship sails down, anchor down, because that's a noob move. And that really was a noob move by de Jalier here as well. Anchoring your ships and leaving them there was really stupid. But he thought it was really, really smart. Because he thought he had his port flank covered. He thought that no one could get over there. He thought the British could only get at him from the east if they got there. And that was the strongest part of the French line, that coming in from the northeast, that was facing against the brunt of the best ships of the French line. And it was going to come in against the prevailing winds. So it was going to be very hard for the British ships to maneuver because they would be effectively sailing against the wind. Of course, this isn't how it's going to go. On August 1st,
Remember to clonk that follow button.
On August 1st, 1798, Admiral Nelson arrives at Alexandria with a fleet that was basically, in terms of warships, the same size as the French. He had gotten his reinforcements and had 13 74-gun ships of the line and a fourth rate, which is like a frigate. It has 50 guns. When Nelson got to Alexandria, he found just some light French ships and a few transports. Nothing that was battle-worthy. Just like this is the logistics part of his fleet. Where's the rest of his fleet? The main fleet was gone. So he sent his smaller ships out. And you have to remember, Nelson is an admiral. He is in charge navally here. He sent out a few of his smaller ships to figure out where the heck the French had gone. And then finally, and you have to remember, the British fleet here has been looking for this French fleet for months. They've never seen them. And finally, after about 2.5 months, a French scout or British scout catches sight of the French fleet at anchor in Aboukir Bay. It's called the Battle of the Nile because it's basically where the Nile comes out, just off to its east. But it's really the Battle of Aboukir Bay. Nelson's fleet arrived at Aboukir Bay at about 6 p.m. on August the 1st. So this is still light. August the 6th, very near the equator. It's still not dark yet. De Jalier spotted them. Saw them coming. But he said, it's probably too late for them to attack. So I surely have time to make preparations. And I will just leave my fleet at anchor until the morning, so then we can maneuver and figure out what we're doing here at the British. So he intentionally made the decision. They're coming. I can see them. And I'm still going to leave my ships at anchor here. Horatio Nelson had a reputation for being a guy who just charged right in. And no matter what the time of day was, that's exactly what he did right here. He charged right in. Focused all of his attention on the northwest side of the French line, that supposedly best side of the French line. And in doing so, the British were able to double and triple team targeted French ships, while they had this line of ships coming down to the southeast that could do nothing because they were at anchor. So you have to realize that what was happening here is these ships would come in on these three lines that are indicated here on the map very well, and they would just run, double. Now they had to get there and then turn, because they had to not go in nose in. That wouldn't work. These ships, most of them didn't have bow guns, but they would go boom, boom, boom as each section of this phase passed. And those French ships could do nothing. They were at anchor. They had no momentum. They could effectively fire in an arc off their starboard side like this, and that was it. They couldn't change that arc at all. Meanwhile, the British ships were coming in, and as they maneuvered, let me get rid of all that. As these British ships maneuvered, they could run in, turn, have this firing arc look like this, run in, turn, have the firing arc look like this while they reloaded, and just kept doing that. And they would get off multiple shots while the French had no control over their arc of fire, this cone of fire they could put out with all of their 74 guns. It was simply fantastic from Nelson. And the whole time, these French ships sitting down here could do jack about it because the British weren't fighting them. They were taking their very evenly matched armada and just fighting half of the French fleet. Remarkable that Duvalier just said, let's keep it at anchor. So while the British double and triple teamed the French ships to the northeast, the hammer blow came. One of the British captains, another famous British captain, Samuel Hood, who you'll remember some battleships named after this guy, he identified under orders. Nelson told him, go find a way to get around the other side, the port side, the west side of the French. And under orders, he found it. He found that Duvalier was not as close to these shallows here as he thought, that there was this gap. And so Nelson Hood sails around and says, yep, there's a way down here. And then he just goes. He just goes and takes 3 other ships with him. Signals he's found a way to get on the other side of the French. And what happens is they just destroy. They just destroy that part of the French line. And by that time, the French are going, okay, let's get going, because that upper portion of our fleet is getting annihilated. But it was probably too late at that point. Nelson had just outdone Duvalier by a mile, more tactically correct than Duvalier had been. So the French were now surprised, surrounded, and getting blasted from all sides. And best of all, Duvalier, whose plan this had been mortally wounded in one of the initial cannon blasts that came from the British. Like, he was just dead. So the guy in charge, there was nobody in charge, and the French were trying to identify who's supposed to be giving the orders now while they're getting effectively massacred at sea. The French made a pretty valiant attempt here to hold out while still at anchor. But their morale was just absolutely crushed when the flagship, the Orient, which was the French flagship, just fire broke out on its deck. You see your flagship where your leadership's supposed to be on fire, that's a crushing morale blow. The battle kept going on, and then about 10 o'clock that night, that same ship, the Orient, the flagship, which had been on fire for a while, just went boom, just exploded. Now, that's obviously the fire caught the powder magazine, and it just sank to the bottom of the bay. It took with it a huge amount of Maltese taken from the island of Malta. Some of that payout that Napoleon got while he was there, it took to the bottom most of that gold. And that gold has never been found. When the Orient blew up, fighting along the line from both sides stopped for about 10 minutes. They were like, because everyone's like, oh, it's a pretty big spectacle to see. But at that point, when the British got going again, it was really just a mop-up operation. At that point, by the time the Orient blew up, about half of the British fleet either destroyed or just flat out had surrendered or had been captured. The other half finally had gotten their anchors up, and they tried to get out of the bay. But the British were right on top of them and trapped them there, blockaded their ability to get out of the bay. They had them outnumbered by a significant amount at that point. Of those 17 ships that went into the bay for the French, only 2 ships of the line and one of those frigates got out. The rest, 14 ships, were either destroyed outright or captured. British losses at the Battle of the Nile / Aboukir Bay were exactly 0. No ships lost. It was a spectacular victory for Horatio Nelson, and it was a crushing defeat for the French. This, if you've seen the movie Master and Commander, this is the Nile that is referred to in that film, which takes place about 6 years in the future from where we are now in our narrative. This is... Nelson was already pretty famous. This made him legendary. And this is still not his best ever victory as a naval commander. That will come at the Battle of Trafalgar. But it's still just crazy. Crazy how well Nelson did here. His basic motto of just go at them was exactly the right thing to do. especially because they were at anchor. So Napoleon's on his way back to Cairo, following his pursuit of Ibrahim Bey, when the messengers finally catch up with him with the disastrous news that basically the entire French war fleet was lost. And though this probably was a pretty nasty knife in the gut to Napoleon, he took a cocky posture in response to the news. Essentially, Napoleon, at least outwardly, said it was no big deal. We'll still stay here and do what we came here to do. And when we decide to finally leave Egypt, I guess we'll just go home the same way Julius Caesar did when he went home from Egypt, which means going around the entire eastern rim of the Mediterranean, because that's what Julius Caesar did. In private, though, Napoleon had to have known that this loss at Aboukir Bay had just wrecked everything for him. On top of everything here, on top of this just disaster at Aboukir Bay, the next most important part of what happened is that it convinced the Ottoman Empire that they should probably get into the fight against the French. And so, as we have been saying for a couple of weeks, that it's just the British, and yeah, the quasi-wars going out there with the Americans, but the British are really the only declared belligerent. Not anymore. And as we talk about with the Second Coalition, that's eventually going to be the War of the Second Coalition, the Ottoman Empire declares war on France. That's pretty significant. Let me get the Battle of the Nile map out of here for a little while, because we're going to go just back to using this one. Egypt and Syria in 1798 and 1799. So here we go. The Second Coalition now is building again. There is a group of nations now collectively fighting against France. So the Ottomans are out there in the Middle East, and the British are fighting them at sea. But still two nations declared at war with the French and, more importantly, with Napoleon. That list will get added to as we get into next week. But for now, wish I could make, there we go. That's the size I want. And this is where, on terms of the map, where we're going to stay for the rest of the night. We're also going to take our first break, because we've been going for almost an hour. So the Battle of the Pyramids is over. The Battle of the Nile is over. Napoleon's fleet is in ruins in Aboukir Bay, and he has no way to get anything from France now. The British are going to establish a blockade. They're basically going to let nothing get in. They want Napoleon blind, because things are going to go down in Europe, which we're really not going to talk about that much tonight, that they don't want Napoleon to know about, because they'd rather keep him bottled up here in Egypt. But when we get back, with the Ottomans now joining this new anti-French coalition, Napoleon is going to proceed as if everything's all good in Egypt. And we've got a whole lot more to get into. That was an action-packed hour. Yeah, we had the landing in Alexandria, the Battle of Shubrikit, the Battle of the Pyramids, the Battle of the Nile. It's a pretty, I got all that done in an hour. It's pretty shocking, but it's a lot of information. The Battle of the Nile is the most important part there, without a doubt. The Battle of the Nile is the most important piece of all of it. Napoleon won there. And had his orders been followed, the Ottomans might not have joined the Second Coalition. But they saw that Napoleon was now weak, that he was the 40,000 men that he brought with him, that he wasn't going to get anybody else to help him. And so that is why they feel pretty confident to say, yep, let's go blow that guy up. Dang underlings. Yeah, he's a rear admiral, just one that should have listened to his orders. But we'll be right back. Make sure you get a drink, stand up. Make sure you stretch your legs at least. But get up, bathroom, all the stuff we usually do at break time. Appreciate you guys hanging out. Appreciate your attention. We'll be back in a few minutes. And, yeah, thanks. It was. The Egyptian campaign is pretty interesting, and we're only a third done with it. So I'll talk to you in a few minutes.
Let's rock!
We're back. Hopefully you got your legs stretched in there. Before we move on, Berlin mentioned the glasses, and yeah, I have new glasses because apparently I'm getting old, but one of the things I wanted to share with you guys was cleaning glasses is a pain in the butt, right? And this isn't sponsored or anything. I don't do sponsorships, but microfiber cloths weren't getting the job done for me, so I looked into how do the astronauts keep their glasses clean. There's actually this thing called Peeps, which is basically tweezers with a microfiber pad on them.
Thank you for wasting your money.
Who did that? Why am I not seeing that? Did someone just use a card or buy cards and the overlay is not working again? Awesome. Let me go see who that was. But anyway, those Peeps have a microfiber pad, but more importantly, inside the case, the thing cleans the microfiber pad. There's a little thing in there that it's ionized, and it takes the material off the microfiber pads on there, and it's just been, boom, easier to clean my glasses. So, funny, Streamloots is not working yet again. This is getting irritating with this bot, so let's go look at revenue and see who did that, because I got the sound, but we didn't get the overlay. Mads, 50 packs. Thank you very much. Back, my mom said you said something to me. I was saying Berlin, the glasses. With getting my glasses, I got these things called Peeps, which are what the astronauts use to clean the glasses, and they actually just go over the top and you just use like tweezers, and then the interior of it is a cleaning piece that cleans the pads off. It's so much better than microfiber towel that you have to like get all the crap back off of. You had mentioned at the top of the show. Excuse me, but that's not sponsored. Let me go figure out why that's not working again, and we'll get right back to the episode here. So go over here, show me that, give me this, and I'm going to disconnect and reconnect. I literally tested Streamloots yesterday to make sure that it was all nice and connected, and then of course it's not. So integrations, let's blow that up, and then let's relink it, and then let's go ahead and see if one of these cards works, yeah? Cards and packs, let me just see if, hey, this one's fun. Test that card and see if it plays. Of course not. Why would that work? Alright, Streamloots are broken again, because it seems to always break on a Friday night, but it surely is connected. At least it says it is connected. Let me try this one more time. You guys will all get that beep again, and then let's see once more if the cards will work. Alright, connected again. So apparently I need to connect it right before the show from now on. Even though it should be a variable that saves. Again, Mads, yeah, it's Saturday, so why would anything work? Thank you again for the 50 packs. Much appreciated. And again, the revenue from Streamloots and from Twitch subs and bits and everything else that goes right now to the Ukrainian Red Cross after we pay the taxes on it. So appreciate you contributing to that effort. But where we left things off before we went to the break was Napoleon just got word that the entire French war fleet had been annihilated at Aboukir Bay. But again, he continued to move forward as if everything was fine. And his first step in his efforts in Egypt after he had kind of settled the matter militarily on land was to start a reorganization of the Egyptian political system now that the French were in charge. Because of course he did, right? I mean, the man's up there in Italy making new countries and in Switzerland. But it wasn't the complete reorganization that we've seen him do in like the Cispadane or Transpadane or Transalpine republics. It was, what he was doing here was basically taking a new top-level administrative body of French administrative body and just grafting it onto the top of what existed in Egypt. So he appointed new divans, D-I-V-A-N, divan, to run various districts and prominent cities. And these divans, which is a word that simply means counselor in the Ottoman Empire, were natives to Egypt, but personally selected by Bonaparte to tie their loyalty not only to France, but to him personally. So there were no elections here. There was just an administrative apparatus that was being placed on top of the Egyptian governmental system that the Mamluks had just abandoned, and Napoleon was picking out the people that he knew should probably be loyal to him and putting them in these positions. He hoped to create kind of a semi-representative ruling council which would advise these appointed divans, but the plans don't get that far. They just don't get that far. What happens in Egypt doesn't allow him to get that far. So, as I said in the first section tonight, Napoleon considered the buy-in from the local Muslim leaders to be really critical. So he just bent over backwards, like flattered and cultivated them as allies. He gave the Muslim leaders all manner of, personal favors and gifts and special perks. And his letters, the correspondence which we now have access to after several hundred years. Yeah, reorg is his thing for sure, Berlin. But the letters that we actually now have access to, they were filled with professions of respect and admiration for Islam. And that's one of the reasons why Napoleon does get tagged, and it's still an open question. I mean, there are people out there who think he did convert to Islam. I don't think he did, because I know him well enough from reading about him to know that he might have even gone through the ceremony, but I don't think he ever converted to Islam, because it was just a propaganda play for him to do so if he did. There's no way Napoleon could go back to Europe, the Muslim, and to expect to command anyone's respect. It's just the way the world was back then. But when the Prophet Muhammad's birthday came around on August 21st of 1798, Napoleon did lead a huge celebration procession in Cairo. Aside from these political machinations, though, Bonaparte also started an array of modernization projects that were spearheaded by all of those science and engineering nerds that he had brought with him on the expedition. That group of 130, 140 so experts in everything from architecture to archaeology to horticulture to geology. He brought all those guys with him, and they started to modernize Egypt. So, thank you very much again, very loud muffler. So the French arrival in Egypt is generally recognized as the start of modern Egypt, because all of the innovations the French introduced during this time brings Egypt more to a state more closely resembling the modern era. The French in Egypt at this time pioneered new urban sanitary measures for the major cities. They rebuilt canals which were long abandoned, and founded an official postal service in Egypt. They brought in the concept of running windmills to grind grain, started working on a system of structured irrigation to replace the flood inundation from the Nile system, which had basically been the ways Egyptians had done agriculture for thousands of years. Same way that the Vietnamese were doing agriculture when the Americans got there in the 1960s and 1970s. Still the way they do it today, by the way. Flood inundation is a perfectly acceptable way to do agriculture, but irrigation structures are more effective. And the French brought that to Egypt and said, stop loosing the river into your fields to irrigate them. The French also brought in the very first printing presses to Egypt and launched the first newspapers, which, of course, at the time served as organs of French propaganda, but still, it was an innovation delivered to Egypt by the French. Now, the French science and engineering and liberal arts experts then formed themselves into an organization, which is called the Egyptian Institute, with headquarters in Cairo, where they would house, catalog, analyze all the material that they planned to go out into Egypt and study. It's the reason they were there. And these experts were interested in everything. Again, archaeology, anthropology, botany, zoology, geology, linguistics, and anything else related to understanding the world. They were just into it. So at the Egyptian Institute in Cairo, these guys set up a main library, an astronomical observatory, a main laboratory, a botanical garden, a menagerie, and eventually their accumulated artifacts, data, observations, and notes were all compiled into a series of volumes, which was called The Description of Egypt. Now, this Description of Egypt was a series, and it didn't start publication until 1809. But after that, 37 volumes of information were published before it ceased publication in 1826. The Egyptian Institute disbanded officially in 1801 after the French finally surrendered there, which we're going to actually get to tonight. But it was revived again in 1836 as a coalition of the French, English, and some German academics. And the Egyptian Institute exists in Cairo to this day. It used to house over 200,000 rare manuscripts, many of them gathered during Napoleon's original group's time here. But the library which housed those manuscripts and many of the artifacts was burnt down by an errant Molotov cocktail during the Egyptian uprising.
Remember to clonk that follow button.
The Egyptian uprising was part of the Arab Spring just back in 2011. 200,000 rare manuscripts from a time dating back thousands and thousands of years, and during the Arab Spring, a Molotov cocktail hit the building, caught it on fire, and protesters and soldiers both ran into the Egyptian Institute. They just wanted to save what they could after that fire got started there in 2011. But they only managed to pull out about 30 or 40,000 documents of 200,000. So it's a significant historical loss. Now, a lot of those documents had been transcribed and recorded elsewhere, but still, you lost the original. You lost over 100,000 of the originals, 160,000 of the original documents. It's just a massive loss for human understanding. And to jump ahead a little bit while we're on the topic, by far the biggest discovery by the French expedition was the Rosetta Stone, which was discovered in April 1799, so about 6 months from where we are talking, strategically with Napoleon, by an engineering officer named Pierre-François Bouchard, while he was assisting in the refortification of the port city of, wait for it, Rosetta. Rosetta is located right here. This is where the Rosetta Stone was found. They are refortifying the city, and believe it or not, the Rosetta Stone was not the first time the Rosetta Stone had been found. The Rosetta Stone was made in the 2nd century BC, but it had been moved to Rosetta to serve as a foundation rock, meaning a support rock at the base of Fort Julian in the 15th century by the Ottoman Turks. The Ottomans looked at it and said, and put it underneath the fort just to support things. And it remained there until it was rediscovered by Bouchard in 1799. So it's not like Bouchard wasn't the first guy to find the Rosetta Stone. He was the first guy to find the Rosetta Stone and go, this is important. It was taken and turned over to the linguistic and anthropology experts of the expedition, and yes, it turned out to be very important. So the Rosetta Stone is a decree that was carved in 196 BCE during the reign of Hellenistic king Ptolemy V. Now, Hellenistic meaning Ptolemy was one of Alexander the Great's generals who then established the Ptolemaic dynasty in Egypt, and that's why it's Hellenistic, because anything Greek is basically Hellenistic in terms of ancient history. So it wasn't an Egyptian ruler in Egypt. It was a line of Hellenistic descendants of Ptolemy, who is Alexander's general. Cleopatra is one of those, by the way. But this decree, written by Ptolemy V, was written in 3 different languages. It was obviously written in ancient Egyptian hieroglyphics, which were, pictograms that at the time no one understood what the heck they meant. It was also written in Demotic Egyptian, which is a rarely used and little understood left-to-right reading phonetic script. But then finally it was written in ancient Greek, because the Ptolemaic dynasty was Hellenistic. And everyone understood ancient Greek. So it's a cipher. You can take what's written in Greek and say, oh, that's what the hieroglyphs mean. Members of the Egyptian Institute guessed correctly that it was all the same passage, that this listing was the same thing being said in 3 different languages. And that's not uncommon. Obelisks were that way too. If you needed to say something for all people of all time, you didn't just write it in your own language. You wrote it in everyone's language. And because they all knew Greek, that this was probably the key to cracking the hieroglyphs. And it was thought to be one of the most remarkable discoveries ever. And it would take them 20 years to take what was being said in the hieroglyphs and figure out how it translated, because it's not a one-to-one. It's not like A equals 2. The way in which sentences are structured is very different between Romance languages and picture and script languages and Cyrillic. It's all different. The way Japanese is even written in terms of being, written in Roman characters is very different in terms of, we kind of get noun, verb in English. It's not that way. Excuse me again. So it took them 20 years to translate what exactly the hieroglyphs were saying based on what the structure of Greek was. Most of the credit for the deciphering would go to the Englishman Thomas Young and the Frenchman Jean-Francois Champollion. And it was just this thing, amazing, to give us a key to unlock a people and culture that was thousands and thousands and thousands of years old. So getting back on track, despite Napoleon's cultivation of the Muslim leaders, those leaders were paying more attention to what he was doing than what he was saying. And to all of them, all of these French modernization efforts looked like, mostly cultural imperialism by infidel Europeans that were trying to destroy ancient Muslim culture. And that is a typical response, to be quite fair. Anytime a unmodernized, and I use this statement lightly, uneducated or lesser educated culture sees modernization coming, the first knee-jerk reaction all the time is you're trying to destroy our way of life. And that is a very common theme in the Middle East, where especially if Westerners are trying to come in there and make changes, it's always seen as almost an assault on who they are and who they have always been. So, as all these modernizations efforts were going down, the imams, these Muslim leaders, were looking at Napoleon and going, well, yeah, but obviously you're doing all of these good things for us because you're trying to turn us into you. And we don't want that, because we want our way of life. Our way of life is also a common theme in the American Civil War, by the way. Good or evil, it's what the Southerners were saying, don't take away slavery because it's our way of life. It's, good or bad, they didn't care. The local religious leaders didn't have any concept that okay, let's take it this way. Even if the imams didn't think that Napoleon was trying to impose some level of cultural imperialism on them, they couldn't help but notice that there was a vast array of new taxes being imposed by the French. And it's doubtful they took much solace in the notion that the French weren't just doing this to Muslims. They were doing this to Belgians. They were doing this to the Dutch. Everywhere they went, the French were going, you pay us so that we can continue to do what we're doing. The Muslims in Egypt were not unique in that regard. But they also didn't know that. So here comes Napoleon with his army and all of these experts, and they're changing the way we do things and telling us to pay them money in the course of it and uprooting everything we know about our way of life. Napoleon was still being very, very careful about not insulting them. But they didn't care about what he was saying. They cared about what he was doing. The local religious leaders were helped along with their growing hatred for Napoleon by contact that they were having with the British and the Ottomans, both of whom were saying, don't believe a word Napoleon says. Revolutionary France is just about naked conquest and sacrilegious atheism, which it was about atheism for a time. It really isn't about that now. And recent history would suggest, yeah, they probably are just about naked conquest. So the leaders in Cairo, the Muslim leaders in Cairo, started to talk amongst themselves about, maybe booting the French out. And so they got a hold of some weapons and started to actively plot on how to boot the French out. And in mid-October 1798, the imams started to spread these guns they had collected throughout the native population of Cairo, and urged everyone to join in a holy insurrection. And that gets tossed around a lot. Do it in the name of religion. Well, okay. But they basically were calling for a holy insurrection to expel the foreign invaders who were threatening our way of life. It's a great way to get local people riled up. On October 26th, they launched their armed uprising against using the Great Mosque at Al-Azhar as their base. There's a great mosque in Cairo called Al-Azhar. And if you don't know how mosques work, like in Western culture, especially in U.S. culture, we view holy buildings as sacred, but I guarantee you that most people would never think about defacing a church. The idea of a mosque being assaulted is a big deal, and even misused or any offensive action being taken inside of one is a big deal in Islam. So it was a semi-organized bloodbath on the part of the imams. And basically any Frenchman who was caught out in the open was simply just killed. And this included the French general in charge of the garrison in Cairo, who is Dominique Martin Dupuy. And I don't have him on the board because he just won a room. And one of Napoleon's aide-de-camp, who is Joseph Slukowski. Bonaparte was outside the city, on the other side of the river, in Old Cairo, when this whole thing started. But it didn't take him very long to rally a force to come pacify the city. And if these imams had been smarter, they'd have waited till Napoleon was well clear of Cairo before they did any of this. So Napoleon pushed his way in, back into New Cairo, and then his men just tore through the hastily erected Egyptian barricades that had been put up by the rioting forces. And then a brief standoff at the mosque itself, at Al-Azhar, ensued. But Bonaparte, who was just done with the idea that, hey, we came here, drove the Mamelukes out like we said. We've been respectful of your culture. Those things were all true. And we're helping bring you into the modern age. Also true. He was done with the idea that these people had risen up against him. And so what he did was he brought up the heavy guns and pointed them at the Al-Azhar Mosque. And then the French blasted their way inside the mosque with artillery and killed everyone inside the mosque. This is Christian infidels walking into an Islamic mosque and slaughtering the Muslims inside. That's all anyone in the Muslim world is going to see from this. Also, so much for being really considerate about the sensitivities of Muslim culture, because what he should have done was got inside, drug them outside, and dealt with them outside the mosque. It was a bad decision by Napoleon, but in a total, the French lost about 300 men, taking Al-Azhar back and quelling this little riotous rebellion. And the local Egyptians in Cairo lost between 3,000 to 5,000. But as further punishment, the people of Cairo themselves were hit with a further tax. And their local divan was removed. So the local guy, who was supposed to be the governor type person, was just yoinked out of position, and a French military commissioner was put in his place. Anyone who could be identified as a leader in the uprising was arrested and executed, regardless of if they were, say, a pretty high person in the Islamic faith. These were harsh measures. But Napoleon was a student of Rome and of Machiavelli. When the Romans were nice to the people they conquered rose up. When the Romans brought the boot to the people they conquered, there weren't any uprisings. People didn't want to piss off Rome. Napoleon never saw another riot or revolt in Egypt during his time there because he brought the boot down on these rioters in Cairo. I think he had every right to do it. I just don't think it was the right way to do it. There were certain sensitivities he wasn't paying attention to that could have just... The public face of this crackdown could have been better on his behalf. But I do think that rounding up the leaders and putting down the people who were driving an insurrection, that's probably the right thing to do. Just how he did it probably wasn't the right way. So at the end of 1798, the French occupation of Egypt is, relatively secure. Though how permanent it could possibly be, given that you're completely cut off from Europe, is kind of an open question. But Napoleon just kept acting like it was going to be permanent, even though he was blockaded and had no naval support. And in December, he gathered up a company of about 300 men, and he headed down to Suez, the Gulf of Suez, which is at the north point of the Red Sea. And as I mentioned last episode, one of the great, great dreams of the European powers was to carve out a canal which would link the Red Sea to the Mediterranean Sea. And the Suez Canal, to this day, just cuts kind of this way. And they wanted to make this connection. They wanted this connection to be done. There were lots and lots of reasons why everybody wanted to link the Red Sea to the Mediterranean Sea. As it stood right now in this moment, in the end of 1798, if you wanted to travel by sea from Europe to India and China, you had to go around the tip of Africa, which is a very long and very dangerous journey, especially around the tip of Africa. That trip could be cut by about 4,000 miles. if you sailed into the Red Sea, put in at Suez, and then hand everything off your boat to porters, or just sold your goods to some Arab middleman, and they would then transport it to the ports on the Mediterranean side and then load it onto a different ship. So it was cutting into your profits to do that, and it wasn't the easiest thing to do. It could save 4,000 miles. Sigh! But it wasn't the easiest thing to do either. But just adding those few hundred miles over land from the Suez point to the Mediterranean, it just jacked up the price of everything because you had to pay for the land transport. It was doable. And the British in particular, before they had kind of lost control of Egypt to France, was doing it. They were using the Red Sea as a primary link to India, which is the reason Bonaparte was so interested in hitting Egypt. Because it would force the British to entirely rely on that longer remote route around the tip of Africa. Oh, he's way past post-op 18 days. I need to update that. My dad, for Cy, because he hit that, my dad is now able to drive, able to sleep in his own bed, even though sleeping on his side is still a little bit of pain, and doing much better. My dad is doing much better. Still has some weight restrictions now, are 20 pounds, but my dad is doing much better. I need to update that. Thank you very much, Cy, for asking. But as Napoleon had taken over, he had forced the British to go around the Cape of Good Hope, which then also made it easier to trap British ships in a combined fleet of French and Spanish and Dutch naval ships. So they were trying to isolate the British completely, and they were able to start doing that because they had taken Suez. So if this canal could be built, it would cut the French sea routes by 4,000 miles, and then by default, because they were able to do it so much faster, it would give France a near monopoly on Asian trade. So what Napoleon's expedition to Suez was looking for in particular was this. There was a legend from the time of the pharaohs called the Canal of the Pharaohs, and it is actually attested to exist in numerous ancient sources. It had allegedly been built back in the 500s BC, running from Suez west to the Nile instead of running right into the Mediterranean. So the Canal of the Pharaohs supposedly kind of ran this way, not this way. And there are a lot of documents that say it existed. But it also had been abandoned because over that time, the 500s BC until the 18th century, the course of the Nile River had shifted a lot. It's a big river. But after some methodical searching, the party that Napoleon led actually did find the remnants of the Canal of the Pharaohs. And so they sent to work, they started to study its course and how it was built. But this is as far as Napoleon would get on his dream of building a Suez Canal before there was a Suez Canal. Because unfortunately, he had to leave the canal mission in January 1799. Because remember, the Ottomans have now declared war on France. And because they had been finally convinced to throw their entire weight against the French, they were massing to invade Egypt on two fronts. The first was a land army massing in Syria, and the second was a sea army massing on the island of Rhodes that would sail down and put in Alexandria. So Napoleon is now looking at the Ottomans coming down from Rhodes, which is up here, kind of sailing that way toward Alexandria, and then a land army coming out of Syria into Egypt to fight him. While he's kind of down here sorting out where this canal is, still has around 39,000 men. He really hasn't lost anybody in all the fighting, and that's amazing considering he's fought against two massive heavy cavalry charges and put down a riot and taken the city of Alexandria. The fact that he is still intact as an army is pretty remarkable. But the news he gets is that the Ottomans are coming. They're coming from two places. And guess what? He's absolutely no ability, zero ability, to do anything about this naval invasion. None, because he has no navy anymore. the Battle of the Nile took away his capability to counter anything coming at him from sea. Napoleon likely had been expecting something like this ever since the Ottomans joined the war, because it took him no time, zero time, to launch a bold, very preemptive strike against the Ottoman army that was coming at him from land down through Syria. So rather than waiting for the Ottomans to come, he collected 13,000 men in February 1799 and marched them into Syria, north into Syria, to halt this Ottoman advance before they got anywhere near Egypt. He only took 13,000 guys with him. It's pretty bold. While he was at it, he planned on capturing a string of ports, which would further strengthen the French position in the east. It's true, it would be better if they had, ships to put in those ports, but they don't. So, as he got news in January that the Ottomans were coming, it took him until March 3rd to reach his first major objective, which was the port city of Jaffa, which is basically today where Tel Aviv is. So you have to understand, this is Jaffa. This is Jerusalem. That's how far away from home Napoleon is, and he's marching 13,000 guys across the southern Mediterranean basin, up through Gaza, to where modern Tel Aviv is, at Jaffa. So he's at Jaffa. He reaches that first port objective. And taking Jaffa was critical, because the rest of Napoleon's campaign was predicated on the idea of taking this port, putting his heavy guns basically on barges, and floating them and his siege equipment to wherever he needed them next. Because hauling that overland through the desert is not easy. Floating it is a whole lot easier. So Bonaparte expected Jaffa to just give up. Like, he marched up with his 13,000 guys, and he just expected them to run with the white flag. But they refused. And not only did they refuse, but Napoleon sent a Turkish envoy into the city of Jaffa to negotiate their surrender, and the city responded by beheading that guy. And then sent the guys back to Napoleon. So this just, obviously, we kind of got a sense for Napoleon as a guy at this point. Obviously, it pissed him off. And the French assaulted the city for 4 days after that, until they finally entered it on the 7th of March, 1799. And then, because of the insult, there's a term in terms of capturing a city called taking your men off the leash. That whole idea of, let's be really respectful to everything and there's no looting or pillaging. Yeah, those rules are gone now, because Napoleon took his men off the leash and said, go get them. And for 2 straight days, Napoleon's men just ran wild in Jaffa. It was a terror campaign, non-stop within the city. Thousands were killed. People were raped. Looting and destruction just followed in their wake. It was bad, but I wish I could say it was worse than other times their men had been taken off the leash anytime contemporarily to this. And that's what happened. But again, the need to tread lightly and, be delicate to the cultural sensitivities of Islam gave way to the more practical need for Bonaparte to assert his dominance over his enemies. And the siege and occupation at Jaffa was also right around the time that the French army was hit with a problem that would plague them, not just for the rest of the campaign, but for the rest of their time in the East. And that thing was the literal plague. In March 1799, the plague started spreading ominously through the ranks of the French army. And when we say the plague here, we're speaking of the bubonic plague, which is suspected to have been the root cause of the Black Death that swept through Asia, Europe, and Africa in the 15th century and killed like 50 million people. Without treatment, plague has a very high mortality rate, ranging between 30 to 90% chance of death depending on the individual. And the spread of plague in the French army in 1799 not only obviously affected the health of the soldiers, but it was a hammer blow to their morale. Anytime the disease spreads through the ranks, it's a morale killer. The plague is obviously scary business, so before leaving Jaffa, Bonaparte set up a plague hospital to quarantine his sick troops, and allegedly Yeah, I could have made a kill instill an N95 mask back then, except plague is also spread by touch, and it just requires skin contact, so... But he set up a plague hospital, and there's this, it's allegedly, it feels more like propaganda to me, where there is a painting that is not quite creatively called Bonaparte Visits Plague Victims at Jaffa, which depicts him laying hands on a sick man. It's, he probably went there, but I don't think Napoleon went into and touched these guys. So, Napoleon commissioned the painting, by the way. It was one that after he was firmly ensconced in Europe and had become emperor, he said, yeah, paint me a painting about my time in Jaffa, where I definitely went in there and touched all these sick guys in my army. For reasons you'll understand in a little bit, he probably was also trying to rehabilitate his Egyptian image a little bit. So I really feel like this is more of a propaganda move. I don't doubt he was there. I just doubt that he went in and sat at the edge of the bed of rows of plague victims and talked to these guys. So after depositing a garrison to hold Jaffa, Bonaparte marched with the rest of his army north to the city of Acre, where a good portion of the incoming Ottoman army were stationed while they waited for additional reinforcements from Damascus. Let me check something real quick. Thank you very much for your loud thing again. The French got to Acre, so now we're up here. Acre is up here. You could play that city in the first Assassin's Creed, by the way. It goes back to way before the Crusades. But on March 20th, they start their siege, and Bonaparte kind of confidently predicted that Acre would fall.
Remember to clonk that follow button.
That Acre would fall in a matter of days, and after which they could just move on. Instead, this is as far as Napoleon's going to get in the Syrian campaign. The Ottoman defenders of the city were led by a French émigré officer named Antoine Le Picard de Philippot, who is middle row, second from the right of your guys. He was somebody who had left France during the course of the revolution, and he had been a classmate of Napoleon's. The garrison at Acre was well supplied by the British Navy, who were just bringing in supplies to the port, because it's a port city, and they just settled in. They were like 13,000 guys outside the walls. He's in the desert. We have supplies coming in, which he can't cut off because he has no navy. We'll just sit here. We'll wait for him to just be done with it. But then the critical blow came. Because remember how Napoleon had taken Jaffa because he wanted to put his guns and his siege equipment onto boats and float them up to Acre? Well, yeah, they were captured by the British because the British had actual boats in the water and the French didn't really have anything there to protect it except a couple of gunboats. So all of those heavy guns and all that siege equipment that Napoleon was planning on using at Acre was captured by the British. And guess what the British did? They just took it right into Acre and handed it to Philippot. So Philippot started to use Napoleon's own guns against him to defend Acre. And then this left Napoleon with only infantry to carry out his siege and no way to prevent the British from supplying the city basically at will. And then with this siege stalled out, Napoleon got news that a huge relief force was on its way to Acre from Damascus. So when we come back from our break, we're going to talk about how Napoleon, sitting outside of Acre, not really in a position to take the city, but he's not willing to give up on it yet. How he's going to deal with a 35,000-man Ottoman force coming at him while he is entrenched outside the city. It's an interesting thing that comes next. It's called the Battle of Mount Tabor. And after that, we'll wrap up things for Napoleon in Egypt and then kind of give you the epilogue of the French in Egypt before we wrap up this episode. Hopefully you've enjoyed this one. I've been looking forward to talking about the Egyptian campaign for a long time because it's extremely interesting to me, especially because of the Battle of the Nile and divisional squares and all the things that happen. So we'll be back in a few minutes. Make sure you stand up again and get a drink. We'll wrap up the last piece of the Syrian campaign, get into the Egyptian endgame, and then we'll get to our quiz. I gotta say, I'd have gone home. No one write books about me. Fair enough. Stand up, get to a bathroom, get a drink, walk around. Make sure you stretch your legs. And I'll be back in a few minutes. Thanks for hanging out, and we'll wrap things up in Egypt for Napoleon when we get back.
Let's rock!
Alright, so a couple of things. First, I'm going to let you guys in a little bit of secret. I don't usually call out who's lurking or not, but I'll tell you who's not lurking. Rocket and Gilly. So what I'm thinking of...
Very important, do not do your homework without wearing headphones.
Very important. Don't do your homework without wearing headphones. But Rocket and Gilly aren't here. So what I'm thinking about doing is dialing down the quiz for you guys, so you guys can bam, 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 get a bunch of points tonight while they're not here. But, oh, another thing is, Berlin, you had asked to hear this thing that CF did for me. I'm going to play it for you now. CF, with on no day's notice, did a little bit of walk like an Egyptian for me. Well, he did more for me after Merlin. This is not the live recording from the stream. So on that note, I know it just played, but make sure you go follow my good friend CF Live. He's done a lot of things for me for nothing for this stream. Done music all over the place for me. He's a great guy. Go follow that dude. We'll get back to things in Egypt here. So we left before the break. We left Napoleon outside of Acre without any real ability to take the city. But he wasn't willing to say that yet. And as he's sitting out there, he gets news that a massive relief force of Ottomans is coming to Acre from Damascus overland. Now, I told you that this force coming down from Damascus was 35,000 Ottomans strong. So what's Napoleon do? He dispatches 2,000 men under Jean-Baptiste Kléber. So that's top row, third from the left. And Kléber is someone who I've basically been ignoring thus far in the interest of keeping the story clear. But Kléber has been around for a while. He was part, if you remember, way back, that Mainz garrison that got caught behind the lines in the summer of 1793. He was there. And then he was transferred over to the Vendée, because that's what happened to those troops, where he played a pretty crucial role under Hoche in defeating the Catholic and Royal Army. And General Kléber was also one of the lead Republican generals in that run of battles out west in September, October 1793, just running down things to finish off everything in the Vendée. But now he's in Napoleon in Egypt with Napoleon, off with 2,000 men to face 35,000 Ottomans. And despite the insane numerical difference, Kléber looked at it and said, I like my chances. And he decided to go on the offensive. Kléber located the relief army at the base of Mount Tabor. Now, Mount Tabor is kind of like up here. Coming around, this is where Mount Tabor is. So here's Acre, here's Mount Tabor. We'll clear off of Jaffa. So after Kléber finds this 35,000-man relief army, he schedules a night raid on April 16th that he hoped would just confuse the Ottomans and scatter them. But as Kléber got into position overnight, it took him longer than he wanted, than he'd planned. And so when dawn broke, he wasn't in position, and the 35,000 Ottomans spotted his 2,000-man force. So with his surprise raid now botched, Kléber formed his army into two compact divisional squares because he had sat there and watched Napoleon just obliterate the Mamelukes with this tactic. And for the next 10 hours, the divisional square tactic just kept fighting off wave after wave after wave of cavalry. And the holding out was pretty easy because, again, it was mostly cavalry, and the divisional square tactic is Napoleon's idea is perfect to defend against it. But by the end of the day, Kléber was just running low on food and water and ammunition. He wasn't losing that many men. But that's when Napoleon himself decided to show up at Mount Tabor with another 2,000 men. Because Napoleon had heard about the predicament that Kléber had got himself into and scrambled a relief effort. So when Napoleon got to Mount Tabor, the idea was to attack the Ottoman baggage and force them to divert their attention away from Kléber. And this worked beyond Napoleon's wildest expectations because, and I'm going to kind of draw this down here on its own, you have Kléber, who is down here in two divisional squares, that is effectively fighting off wave after wave of Ottoman cavalry coming at him, and then you have Napoleon with another force that is coming into their back to go after their baggage. This is really rough drawing tactically, but it's what it looks like. And when Napoleon attacked the baggage, which was in the rear, again, one of his tactics, attack the rear, the Ottomans thought they were completely surrounded by the full force of Napoleon's army, and they panicked. And they retreated south away from Mount Tabor and away from Acre. As soon as they started to run, both Bonaparte and Kléber's armies do what you do when an army breaks. And they went after them. 4,000 men against 35,000 men, and they chased them. And it turned it into a massive chaotic rout. And just like that, this huge Ottoman relief army was busted and scattered to the wind by a French force of only 4,000 men, leaving thousands upon thousands of their own dead or just lost behind in the desert. Napoleon and Kleber had stopped the relief army coming from Damascus, but the siege at Acre would still end in failure for the French. Plague had simply just continued to spread, and they had no way, again, no way of breaking into the city. So 2 days later, one last-ditch assault on May 10th, Bonaparte finally decided to give up. He made one more go of it and was like, nah. And so he announced to his men that since they had defeated the Ottomans in the field and taken this other string of cities, that the work here was done and declared victory. They were victorious. They really didn't need Acre. So technically he didn't lose, but he didn't take the city. But unfortunately for the men under Napoleon's command up in Syria, the march home was pretty brutal. The march back to Egypt was pretty brutal. All of the sick, the people just kept getting plague. They had to be quarantined at the back of the army, and also they had some wounded. So the plague and the victims and the wounded just couldn't move as fast. And that slow progress slowed down the entire French column, which left them open to repeated raids by the Ottomans who were hitting them in their flanks as they went back to Egypt. So eventually, anybody who couldn't keep up was just abandoned. And there is a story, again unconfirmed, that after passing back through Jaffa on the way back to Egypt, Bonaparte
It's about tree fitty.
ordered a surgeon to administer lethal doses of laudanum to his men infected with the plague, but the doctor ethically refused to do it. So at the end of June 1799, Bonaparte arrives back in Cairo. And in keeping up his appearances, he entered the city like some sort of conquering hero. And he had conquered a lot. And he had won a pretty major victory at Mount Tabor. But the 4-month campaign into Syria had cost him 600 men dead of plague, 1,200 killed in action, and 2,000 wounded. Still not that bad, but wasn't great. Because none of those men could be replaced. Because the French in Egypt were still cut off from Europe. They still had no way of getting any support from France, because they were blockaded by the British. The entire Syrian campaign had done nothing more than grant Bonaparte a temporary reprieve from an Ottoman offensive coming at him from Syria, because they were going to come again. At least they were going to plan to come again, and he knew that. On top of that, the other Ottoman force up at Rhodes was just being ferried down by the British to Alexandria, because those guys are allies now in forming a second coalition against France. So when Napoleon got back to Egypt, realizing, yeah, I was able to stop that force, but they're just going to get more and come down. I'm slowly dwindling here now due to the plague. The force at Rhodes is coming. I have no way of stopping that until they're on land. He probably realized right then in this moment that his chances of that permanent presence in Egypt were hopeless. He was cut off. He had no hope of reinforcement. He was governing what it was now a hostile native population. His army again was, slowly dwindling, weakened by the plague. And there was little chance of any permanent success to be had here. There was nothing Napoleon could do about this situation at the moment, except to counter in what way he could this incoming invasion of the Ottomans from Rhodes. So on July 14th, 1799, let that date sink in, because it's the 10th anniversary of the fall of the Bastille. That's how long we've been talking about the French Revolution. The British Navy landed the Ottoman army from Rhodes at Alexandria and easily established a beachhead and proceeded to capture the city, which was not very well garrisoned. 11 days later, July 25th, Bonaparte arrives at Alexandria with 7,000 infantry and about 1,000 cavalry. And he saw that the Ottomans were deploying themselves in two defensive lines. What date? July 25th. 1799 was the date Bonaparte arrived. July 14th, 1799 was when the Ottomans landed, and that is the 10th anniversary of the fall of the Bastille. But when Napoleon got there, he saw that the Ottomans were deploying themselves into two defensive lines, and they had their back to the sea, which Napoleon quickly deduced left them nowhere to run if things went bad for them. And that's really not what you want. You do not want to be close to an ocean or a river that's pretty deep and untraversable. You don't want to pin your forces with water behind them if you can ever help it. So, Napoleon saw what they were doing, saw that they had basically put up 2 defensive lines, and told his guys to go at them. And they broke through the first line in front of the back line, the thicker line. They broke through the first line really easily. It really even wasn't fully formed by the time the French hit it. But the French had a harder time cracking the inner line, the line closer to the city. But a French cavalry general named Joachim Murat, who is upper right, do not forget Murat's name. Murat is going to be around a ton in Season 2. He will be, for the part you should know about now, Napoleon will have a series of marshals who are in charge of each of his corps, with the corps system, which will replace the divisional system. Again, a huge innovation that everyone copies, which we still use today. Joachim Murat identified a weak point on the Ottoman flank of this second line and charged in behind them. Murat was pretty bold as a commander, and he came in so fast that he broke into the tent of the Ottoman High Command and personally captured the Ottoman High Commander of the forces in Alexandria. And he also took a shot in his jaw for the trouble. Murat got hit in his jaw while taking the Ottoman commander-in-chief. Murat will live. He is a fascinating character in history. He will go on to become, again, one of Napoleon's marshals during the French Empire. He'll eventually become brother-in-law to Napoleon, and he will become king of Naples. Murat was also a guy who's been around for a little bit. I just didn't mention him. He was a guy who on 13 Vendémiaire, that time the National Convention needed Napoleon to defend the royalists from crossing the rivers. Murat was the guy who handled the logistics of getting the cannons in place for the famous whiff of grape shot that took place over the bridges in Paris that day. So Murat is a guy who's been with Napoleon for a while, and he's going to be with Napoleon for a while. And then they're going to have a breakup, but Murat is... just remember the name. I've dropped a couple of Napoleon's future marshals in here, Jourdan, Ney, and now Murat, along the course of this series. But Murat and Ney are going to be the guys that really stand out of that group. But the Ottomans broke. When Murat got behind them, they broke. They tried to actually flee and swim back to the British ships or just get out of the path of the French. Of the 18,000 Ottomans who put to shore, remember, Napoleon only went at them with 7,000 infantry and 1,000 cavalry. 18,000 Ottomans who put to shore, 6,000 died. 1,500 were captured, and 2,000 others just went missing. That's a great way to say probably drowned. French casualties, again, numbered merely in the hundreds. Though here we are, with Napoleon really having won every open battle he fought in Egypt, and won big time. I mean, we're talking 10, 20 to 1 loss ratios. He trounced everybody that he fought in the open field in Egypt. None of it changed the larger strategic picture for him. He was still cut off. He could expect no relief or reinforcements from France. And then the British admiral running the blockade fleet, from any potential relief, decided it was high time to allow some news from Europe to get through to the French in Egypt, because they had been basically intercepting every letter Napoleon tried to send and everything everyone had tried to send to him. And Napoleon knew that. Napoleon was a master at feeding the British where he wasn't going through correspondence he knew they were going to read. But this British admiral forwarded all of the dispatches, which were spelling out the scope of the disasters which had befallen the French army in the year since Napoleon had left. And Napoleon had no knowledge of what was going on in France and in Europe until that moment, until after he had retaken Alexandria. And those disasters are what we're going to get into next episode. What's going on back in France, and what's this whole thing about a second coalition, because it's not just the Ottomans. It'll be the Russians too. which is why the Russian flag's been up there this entire series. But Napoleon concluded that if France was going to be saved, and more importantly, his glorious personal ambitions were going to be saved, he was going to have to ditch the men he dragged to Egypt and find a way to get home. But with this latest resounding victory against the Ottomans, he could return home with good tidings about his, quite honestly, unbroken string of victories. But here's the thing. Here's the best general in France who had led his men to Egypt in search of gold and glory. He could not dare tell his men that he was planning to leave. He pretended to his men to merely be heading on a scouting mission to the Nile Delta. So Bonaparte boarded a ship with a small company of loyal associates, and on the night of August 22nd, 1799, he boarded a small ship, sailed for France, and beat the blockade. The next morning, General Kléber, who had been left in Egypt and left in charge, got up and read a proclamation announcing that Napoleon had departed and that Kléber himself had been appointed commander in Egypt. Now, this practically led to a riot, as you can expect, but Kléber told him that everything was okay and Napoleon was only going to France to reorganize reinforcements, which was a bold-faced lie. Kléber knew that Napoleon had no intention of coming back to Egypt. So all those men who had been licking their chops as they sailed from Malta to Alexandria in June 1798, and who counted themselves as Gilly.
Oh, it burns. My lips
What's
are
up, Gilly?
burning. That's new. Has my mouth become wussier?
But all those men who had been on those ships from Malta to Alexandria in June 1798 and counted themselves as extremely lucky for being selected to go off on this grand campaign with the great Napoleon were utterly abandoned by him and to their fate in Egypt. That is, those who were not already dead of the plague, or, who had been killed in battles or native uprisings. The rest of the guys who were alive were just left. No worries, Gilly. So to wrap up the fate of these guys that Napoleon has abandoned, it's going to extend beyond the end of Season 1 here. It's going to extend into the consulate and the imperial period. But the French occupation of Egypt without Napoleon is pretty much going to go as you would have expected it to go with Napoleon, with no support or no reinforcements. With his army dwindling and no expectation that Bonaparte was ever going to come back, Kléber opened up negotiations with the British and the Ottomans. Kléber promised that, the French will abandon Egypt if, we can just go home. If you let the French get out of here and go home, we'll abandon things here. After agreeing to these terms, the British then went back on their agreement with Kléber in March 1800 and landed a huge Mamluk army.
Remember to clonk that follow button
to destroy the supposedly fatally weakened French army. But Kléber won the subsequent Battle of Heliopolis. But he himself was assassinated by an angry native a few months later in June 1800. The utterly demoralized French army hung around in Egypt until about 1801, when the last of them finally wound up holed up in Alexandria, besieged by a British expeditionary force that finally secured another French surrender in September 1801. And we'll wrap up today's episode by noting that this surrender in 1801 is exactly the reason the Rosetta Stone sits in the British Museum and not the Louvre. The details are kind of sketchy, but it appears that the British knew all about the stone pretty much as soon as it was discovered and simply straight up stole it and sailed it back to London, where it remains to this day. So in our next episode, in episode 1.43, we're going to wind back our clock here a bit because we've flung ourselves pretty far forward with Napoleon to cover all of Egypt. I just said 1801. We're going to wind back our clock and pick up that deteriorating situation back in continental Europe that I've talked about a few times now, the one that Napoleon just found out about. This is the situation that led to the formation of the Second Coalition and the subsequent war of the Second Coalition. That coalition will now include the Russians and the Ottomans, And it's a coalition that General Bonaparte will decide it is his destiny to save France from, so that he could then proceed with everything else he perceived destiny had in store for him. But that is Napoleon in Egypt. It's a fascinating campaign where the guy lands, is not just victorious, but exceedingly victorious. He doesn't lose. He loses hardly any troops in the battles he fights. But the loss of the fleet at Abukir Bay was just the end of it. It just ended things for him. He couldn't do anything without the Navy. And the Navy disobeyed his orders, got annihilated by Horatio Nelson. And Napoleon did really well for a while even without that. But reality caught up with him. And being who he was and realizing he couldn't stay there and be captured or surrender with his men if he had, if his ambitions were going to be fulfilled, he abandoned his men. But remember, he was fighting in battles 35,000 to 4,000. The divisional square was an amazing revolution in counter-cavalry tactics for infantry that again will be deployed by the Duke of Brunswick against Napoleon at Waterloo. It's a fascinating year in his career. And it gets talked about, but the Battle of the Nile overshadows it because of how important the Battle of the Nile is. And then everything else overshadows Napoleon because he's Napoleon. Everyone talks about his campaign to Russia and his, the 100 days that when he comes back into France and the loss at Waterloo. But the Egyptian campaign is it's a ball you can look at and say, this is how brilliant this guy was. He had nothing to do with the Nile loss at sea. He knew the fleet shouldn't stay there. And had his orders been followed, the map of Europe could look very different today, because he could have kept marching along the eastern Mediterranean coast and gone past Acre and come back around to the Hellespont or the modern Dardanelles, the Black Sea, and taken Constantinople. It would have looked very, very different if Francois-Paul Brouillet de Jallier had simply listened to him. But he didn't. And Horatio Nelson blew that fleet out of the water. And history is what it is. But that's the episode. Thank you all for your time and attention this evening on what is a longer than normal episode of my past 20. But I wanted to get all of this in there because we're going to go back to France. And we're going to stay there for the next 3 episodes until Napoleon launches his coup and takes over power formally as the lead dictator in France later on in 1799. So remember, he's gone home in, the summer of 1799. We're going to have to pick up with him taking over France later in the year as season 1 comes to a close. So again, that's the episode. Hopefully you all enjoyed it and it was interesting and informative. We are going to go over to the quiz.
Excellent!
And see how much you guys remember right now. The way the quiz works. Exclamation point answer, space, and then your answer. If there is no wrong answer, give it your best try. Try to stay away from... Oh, what is that? There we go. Why did Notepad ask to make changes to my device? That was weird. Exclamation point answer, and then your answer. There is no wrong answer, but give it your best shot. You don't lose points for getting it wrong. Stay away from joke answers. Don't put the word boy or fix with 2 X's in your answer, because we'll call a different command and it won't work. Your answers go into a file. I read them one by one. If you're relatively close, I give you the point. It helps me to understand how much you retain. So here we go. I don't expect a ton of participation tonight because Gilly came in super late and Rocket's not here at all. But again, give it your best shot. Here's the first question of the night. What instructions did Napoleon issue to his men upon landing in Alexandria, and why? You have a minute. What instructions did Napoleon issue to his men upon landing in Alexandria, and why? Gilly, who I'm assuming is taking a wild stab. Mads is redeemed bonus round. You get the question, which follows the play of this card, to get 5 points instead of 1. And I guarantee you Mads got it, so I'm going to give her the points now. So you can see your answer. So I'm going to put those points against you now, Mads. And then when we do your right answer, all of them will update. So that will go to that number. All right, the first answer tonight comes from Mads. Gilly, defend their landing port. No. Napoleon, and I'll read Mads' answer because it's the next one. No looting and pillaging. He wanted to keep the Muslims sweet. That's true. He wanted cultural sensitivity to be a part of the landing. No looting and pillaging. Respect for Islam. He did not want to piss off the locals. Mads gets it. Cheater. I don't think so. Mads. Very good. That takes Mads at 17. The next question. Berlin should get this one, considering he helped me out with it when I was talking about it. Define what the term Mamluk means. Oh, I didn't read yours? I'll go back and read it, Berlin. Sorry. I thought we had gotten through them all. I'll go back and read it. Maintain friendly behavior and respect for the Muslim religion and leaders. He wanted to stay permanently. Yes, I will give you the point when we get through. Berlin's answer. Maintain friendly behavior and respect for the Muslim religion and leaders. He wanted to stay permanently. Absolutely correct, Berlin. Sorry I missed it. I thought I only saw Gilly and Mads go in. My brain didn't see your line pop. You'll get that point as soon as we're in here. Thank you for calling it out. What does the term Mamluk mean? I'll give you that extra point at the end of these answers, Berlin. Berlin is in. Anybody else answer? Mads. Look at that. Gilly, who wasn't here, also seems to have gotten it. So the first answer. The Mamluks were warrior slaves who were purchased as children and raised into an Ottoman warrior caste. Kind of like the Unsullied in Game of Thrones. It's a good analogy. Gilly. Slave soldier. Yep. Slave soldier raised that way from childhood, but yes. Next answer. Warrior slave from Mads. Correct. Next answer. Slave military from generations of Mamluk occupation. Slave military is good enough. And we'll do this. Let me copy yours down because I'm going to put it in there twice. One for Berlin to 16. Another one for Berlin from the last question to 17. There we go, Berlin. You're all whole again. And the third question. Here we go. What new tactical innovation did Napoleon deploy at Shubrikit to counter the massive Mamluk cavalry advantage? Thank you all for participating. I'll be very honest, when I started this episode and there were 2 people watching by the time I hit the entry, I was like, oh man, I've been wanting to do this one for so long. Berlin is in. Berlin's gonna get it again. I'll tell you that much. Berlin's got it. Gilly, I'll probably give that to you. It's not exactly right, but it's right. Mads. I'll give you that one as well if I'm giving the other one to Gilly. Berlin's got it perfectly correct. The other two kind of got the concept, but not the term. Yep, I forgot the term that quick. But the 3 of you will probably get it again. I'll give it. So we'll go with Berlin first. Thankfully, he's first. He's got the right answer. Berlin, the divisional square. That is the correct term, the divisional square. The divisional square is about 6 men deep. It's really a rectangle. Artillery at the corners, so that when cavalry, their tactic would be try to surround that infantry formation, they just get blown away. Very hard to assault. Because as you're coming in, you're getting laid into with artillery. And as you're running the line, You're getting laid into with infantry fire. It was pretty impregnable. Berlin gets it. Gilly gets the concept. Infantry square, that's what it was. It's infantry rectangle, if we're going to be very specific. But Gilly, yes, that's good enough. And Mads. Defensive square. That's what it was, too. It was a defensive square. So it's a good answer. Divisional square is the correct term. But all three of you, you paid attention. Well, Gilly guessed, I guess, or I said it at the end. But yes, very much the correct answer. Mads. Back at 19. Berlin at 18. Did that... Oh, because I didn't do got it. Like, why didn't that go up? I didn't do it for Gilly either. I'm relying on Wikipedia knowledge for my pre-study. Crack me up. Here we go. See if this one was in your pre-game notes, Gilly. Name at least 2 tactical errors made by French Admiral de Gallier at the Battle of the Nile. Name at least 2 tactical errors made by French Admiral de Gallier at the Battle of the Nile. Gilly is in. Tactical error, so no, you don't got it, Gilly. Berlin is in. Mads is in.
My lord, go f yourself!
He's the dummy, not you, Fix. Who is that? No way! Berlin has teamed up with Mads. If Mads gets it right, Berlin also gets that point. So here is Gilly's answer. Here's the thing, right? The Battle of the Nile is when de Gallier didn't listen to Napoleon to get the hell out of Abukir Bay if he saw any trouble. Said, I gotta stick around, the army needs me. And then he anchored his ships on that
Lord,
shoal.
f yourself.
The other way around. Mads, okay, tied it to Berlin. Thank you very much. So he tied his ships to that shoal to his west that he thought could not be gotten around. He anchored his ships, and then he refused to raise those anchors. So any of those would have been great answers. Gilly's answer. He refused Napoleon's order and sent his ships to battle Admiral Nelson. No, he did not do the second one. He didn't follow orders to leave immediately. He also thought he was close enough to shore to prevent flanking on his west side. Also, he was anchored. Dummy. 3 things correct from Berlin. Berlin gets that point, and Mads gets it also because she played team up on that. And then Mads herself. He ignored orders and remained anchored and did not stay close enough to the shore. Yes, that is very good. I'm not here and I need the bonus. Mads gets hers correct as well. Mads goes to 21. The next question. What happened to most of the accumulated records and artifacts of the Egyptian Institute? That is a wild guess. No. What happened to most of the accumulated records and artifacts of the Egyptian Institute? Berlin is in. Berlin's got it. No, it's fair, Gilly. Take a stab. It's a fair guess. So remember, the Egyptian Institute only lasts basically until the first iteration of it lasts until the French are kicked out of Egypt. But it's restarted in the 1830s by a group of British, German, and French people And they accumulated up to 200,000 documents from ancient Egypt in the Egyptian Institute. And they stood in that building until 2011, till the Arab Spring, when an errant Molotov cocktail hit the Egyptian Institute and burned it down. Troops and rioters worked together and saved about 30 to 40,000 documents, but they were there until 10 years ago. Gilly. They were raided and stolen by the British. Incorrect. Berlin. They were burned in fire, started by a stray Molotov cocktail during a riot. That is correct. Did they digitize none of it? The originals were lost, Gilly, but they do have transcriptions. But the originals were lost, and that's still a huge blow. They were tragically lost in a fire from Mads. Correct. The next question. You guys are doing awesome tonight. Yeah, it's not a blow like the Library of Alexandria. Yes, you're right. But still, losing the original documents, we lose our ability to compare to other documents, right? Where, how was this one written? What type of material was it written on? What kind of inks was it written in? It makes dating other materials yet to be discovered more difficult because we don't have the comparative piece of data there. We can look at chemical analyses and things, but without the original, you can't resample that. You can't reinvestigate it. So here's the next question. What made the Rosetta Stone a cipher into understanding hieroglyphics? You lose the anthropological value. Bonus round from Mads. She gets it right. She will get 5 points again instead of 1. What made the Rosetta Stone into a cipher for understanding hieroglyphics? You have 25 seconds. $15 seconds. It was okay. It's near the end. Mads, get your answer in. It had a translation of common hieroglyphics. Gilly deleted his own message. Berlin is in. I was writing a Gilly answer. Mads is in as well. Let's see if Mads got it. Yes, Mads, I will give you your 4 bonus points now. So that when we do your correct answer, you will just get them. So that will take, 26, 27. Done. All right. I was writing a Gilly answer. So what makes the Rosetta Stone a cipher? It was written in Demotic Egyptian, which is a left-to-right translative Egyptian language that wasn't really highly used. It was written in hieroglyphs, which is, at the time of its discovery, a pictogram. Just not understood at all. But because Ptolemy V was the person who created the Rosetta Stone, 500-ish BC, or several centuries BC, it was written in ancient Greek as well, because the Ptolemaic dynasty was a Hellenistic dynasty. Ptolemies came from General Ptolemy under Alexander the Great. So they weren't Egyptians in charge of Egypt at the time. They were a Hellenistic Greek society. So it was, as was common with stones that had decrees on them, they were written in multiple languages, one of which was ancient Greek, and everyone understood ancient Greek. So you could then work on translating ancient Greek to hieroglyphs. And that's what they did. It took them 20 years. The answer from Berlin. It was written in 3 languages, 2 of which were not readily understandable. Luckily, it contained the text in ancient Greek, which would be understood and used to decipher the under 20 years later. Look at that. Berlin just bam, bam, had all the details in his answer. Very good, Berlin. I had knew it had the same things written in multiple languages would make sense, but I couldn't think of a way to say that I had near specifics at hand. It's fair, Gilly. I mean, a cipher is a known language and an unknown language that you can then compare to as the same, the same statements. That's what a cipher is. Well, one form of a cipher. Another cipher is a book cipher, which we'll get into in World War II. Look at the big brain on Berlin. Mads. She came in after the buzzer. That's fine. Gilly, the translation of common hieroglyphic phrases to some common form of language. Common form of language. at the time as ancient Greek common? No. So I would say no to that, Gilly. It's a translation of common hieroglyphic phrases to understood form of language. I would have taken that one. But common language at the time, ancient Greek was not a common language at the time. Mads. That translation, same message in ancient Greek as well as hieroglyphics, so it could be translated. That is correct. Anybody else answer? I don't think so. It was a highly educated desk with 0 details. Now, if you hadn't said modern, like the modern language, it would have been different. Understood language I would have given it to you. Here's the next question. I know how ciphers and cryptography works. What legendary location was Napoleon hoping to find on the Red Sea in late 1798, and for what purpose? What legendary location was Napoleon hoping to find on the Red Sea in late 1798, and for what purpose? No. Ponce de Leon looked for that, Gilly. The Red Sea, yes! Napoleon was... Sorry, that just tickles me. Usually you're not that wildly off whenever you answer a question in my quiz. Berlin is in with 5 seconds left. That's true. I have seen you shoot. It's pretty terrible. All right, what was he looking for? Mads gets in. I'll take it. But I hadn't started talking yet. So there was this legendary thing built in 500 BC called the Canal of the Pharaohs, which supposedly linked the Red Sea to the Nile and would have given a water route that would have saved the hundreds of miles overland porter route of transferring ship to ship at Suez. So Napoleon went looking for it because he was trying to find that water route that would give French the ability to dominate the Asian trade, because the British were now cut off and had to go around Africa. It was his idea of the precursor of what later on in history will become the Suez Canal. He was looking for the Egyptians' method of having done it over, 2,000 years earlier. So it was not the Fountain of Youth, as Gilly said. No. Berlin says he was looking for the Canal of Pharaohs, Pharaohic Canal, and rebuild it as a way to cut 4,000 miles off the journey from the Red Sea to the Mediterranean Sea. He didn't finish rebuilding it. They were still investigating it, but that is its purpose. That is good enough. Mads' answer came in after the buzzer, I believe. It did. Mads' answer. The Canal of the Pharaohs, in order to build a canal between the Mediterranean and the Red Sea. That is correct. The next question, and we have 3 left. Once we get it in there and post it into the chat, and then we take out the extra space that's somehow grabbed. After taking Jaffa, what strategy did Napoleon plan to employ to get his heavy guns to Acre? "35 seconds. After taking Jaffa, what strategy did Napoleon plan to employ to get his heavy guns to Acre?" Gilly is in. "15 seconds. Mads is in. "5 seconds. Berlin is in. So the long story short here is it would have taken a lot of effort to move the guns and the siege equipment over to the sand. Moving them through the sand was a pain in the butt. So he planned to float them by barge. That's why he needed
that follow button.
why he needed Jaffa. Jaffa was a local port. He needed the local port to commandeer vessels to get his guns floated up to Acre, to the north. It didn't happen. The British intercepted them, and then they used those guns against Napoleon at Acre from the walls. Shipping them via naval vessels. I'll take it. Yes. Shipping them. You didn't put a FedEx sticker on them or anything. He sent his heavy guns via ship, but the British took them. That's correct, Mads. Berlin. He wanted to float them on barges, but they were captured by the British because his general didn't listen and he had no navy. His admiral didn't listen, but yes. See, you can make me laugh with your answers even when they're right, Berlin. It's pretty funny. Anybody else? I don't think so. Alrighty, 2 questions to go. No point, get your tanks right. What 2 significant factors led to the failure of the siege of Acre? What 2 significant factors led to the failure of the siege of Acre? You have 25 seconds left. Oh, sweet. I get to raid somebody I don't usually get to raid. 10 seconds left. What 2 significant factors led to the failure of the siege of Acre? And that is it. Let me bring the bot back up so I can see it. And our first answer comes from, basically it's this. The loss of the heavy guns, obviously. He had no way to break the walls. And the plague. The plague was just slowly taking out his army. Gilly, the lack of artillery support and difficulties in fighting in the sand. It is the plague. The plague that was riddling through his army at the time. That was the second part. So half of it right, but that's not worth a point. That's the end of the valid answers. Anybody else get in? Berlin. Napoleon had no support from resupply and reinforcements. Eventually, the bunkered leader, can't remember his name, got a hold of his artillery and used it against him. There's no supply, no resupply, no reinforcements. The plague is the big thing. He probably could have taken the city had he had the artillery and had the plague just not been demoralizing his troops. So that one isn't right. For Mads, the British Navy could keep the city supplied. The French only had infantry. Those are both true. So let's go back and look at Berlin's. Napoleon had no support for resupply or reinforce. Okay, yeah, we'll take both because we'll take Berlin's answer because that is true. The resupply of the port. If I'm taking Mads, then I'm going to take Berlin's because it's phrased in a same type way. So the British could resupply Acre at will because there was no navy and the French had no naval support or reinforcements. That is true. The lack of the guns that were intercepted. So that's another one. And then the plague. The plague, I need to just... Apparently, none of you said it. So the plague ripping through the ranks is a big deal. And it's irritating. Yeah, but it's not... It doesn't prohibit you from taking a city. Probably encourage you to take a city. I believe that's the end of the answers. We have one more question left tonight. We will be rating my good friend Saber in space. He's playing Where We Were tonight. Saber's been a quiet supporter of this stream and his own stream for a while. He hangs out when he can. He's a great guy. He plays KSP and a bunch of stuff. But here's the last question of the night. In your opinion, what do you think of the way in which Napoleon left Egypt? Berlin and Mads making a charge tonight. Berlin, I think you've gotten every one of them. And you will get this one as long as you don't, you answer. This one's impossible to get wrong unless you say, I like turtles or something in the box. What do you think of the way in which Napoleon left Egypt? I'll tell you my thoughts whenever we get to the end of the counter, because I like to think about this one. And because I want you to bear in mind your answer for next episode, because once you understand the other side and why he was needing to run home, it may change your opinion. Gilly is in. Take your time. There's no wrong answer here. Well, obviously there's wrong answers here. Again, I like turtles is not a valid answer. What do I think of the way Napoleon left Egypt? I know what's back in Europe. I know that it's all of a sudden everyone's back to the guns against France. So I know that Napoleon wants a part of that. I also know that Napoleon believes he's probably the best man for the job. And I believe that part's true. So I don't like the idea of him abandoning his men. But I also think he was probably... It's always framed from the position of his ego and his own feeling of destiny. But I also feel like he did think it was the right thing to do. That, yeah, I have to leave these men here because I have to go save France. And if you look historically at the way things had gone in the 1790s, that's probably a little true because it was kind of a stalemate in the First Coalition until Napoleon swept through Italy. So I believe that it wasn't just self-serving ego. I don't like the abandonment of the men, but I still believe it was the right decision. Also, I like turtles. Gilly. Understandable, but cowardly. I don't believe it's cowardly, but you may. We'll see how you feel next week after you watch the VOD. He may have had knowledge that crap is going down in France, but he left his troops behind without support. Well, I'll argue that de Jallier left his men behind without support, but yeah, it's fair. The next answer. That's the end of the valid answer before the end of the timer. I think it was a rotten way to command to take care of his troops, but to keep his dreams alive, he knew he had to leave the unwinnable situation in Egypt. Fair. Berlin, is that perfect 10 for you? I think it is. I think it might be a perfect 10 for Mads, too. I think it was sound for his ambitions, but I disagree with abandoning his troops on my own moral level. Fair. I think France gets overrun if he doesn't go back. But we'll see. Tune in next week to see if that opinion still remains that opinion once you see what's going down in France. Deceitful, self-serving probably is the right word. Perfect 10 for Mads plus her 6 cheater points. More like 8 cheater points. 9 cheater points. All right. Heavy participation from a lot of people who knew the answers. Thank you very much. That was one of the better quizzes. Appreciate you all participating, and it wasn't just the Gillian Rocket Show. It's refreshing. But we are going to get out of here, and too many cheater points. Get some cards, Berlin. There's still free packs out there. You can cheater points, too. If you cheater points enough, you might catch Rocket. But we're going to get out of here. We're going to go raid. Yeah, when I can be here, I'm good at quizzes. We're going to go raid our good friend Saber in Space again, but we're going to get out of here. Don't forget, follow these people I'm about to mention. These are all good friends of mine, members of the Outlaws community. They stream. They are small streamers, but they are fun to be around. And then my good friend is in there as well, CF Live, who just doesn't ever flinch when I say, hey, CF, can you rattle off a minute of Walk Like the Egyptian for me? He's like, yeah, sure, buddy. I'll get that for you this afternoon. It's amazing group of people. So if you're lurking around, click these links that come up and follow these guys. They are near and dear my family, and I just wouldn't be who I am without them and their support and them keeping me level and who I am too. So make sure you go follow all of these guys. We are out of here. Thank you for following along with me tonight in the Egyptian campaign in Egypt. Make sure you follow my good friend Dustin. He streams Monday through Friday, 7:30 a.m. to 10:30 a.m. Eastern Time. He was streaming Silt, which I missed because I was working last Wednesday. Blame these jerks. There is Curse of the Dead Gods. Perm is streaming that game. It's a lot of fun. I don't know if he's going back to it. 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. most days, Monday through Friday right now. That's a great game, by the way. Go play that game. Then there's the Gilius. I need to change him. It's Sunday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Friday, 6 p.m. Eastern Time. He was playing Persona 5 Royale last. Weird. Must have missed that. And then there's Rocket. She streams whatever the hell she wants, so follow her to get the notification or go to the Big Top Outlaws Twitter account to be notified when all of us go live. She's playing Immortals Phoenix Rising last. There is my good friend CF Live, my favorite music streamer on the internet. Definitely hang out with him Wednesdays and Fridays for sure, in the mornings into the afternoons. And then my good friend Mr. Land Diggity, who helped along with some of the music that CF made. He streams games and music. We're out of here, you guys. Have a great rest of your weekend. Thanks for hanging out with me for history. Let's go raid Saber, and I'll talk to you later.
Be excellent to each other.